Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. I've started 2 minutes because I can, because I'm in charge of the button. Don't know where the others are. I'm sure they'll be along in a minute, but at the minute, right now, we've got Ben Scott Robinson with us, and a little bit of a diversion from our normal topic because Ben is in charge, or one of the founders of the small robot company, and I have asked you along, Ben, to tell me all about Tom, Dick, and Harry, if you will.
Hi, Gary. Thanks very much for asking us along, or me along. Yeah, love to talk about Tom, Dick, and Harry. So if I start with a little bit about what the small robot company is and what we're trying to achieve, kick off there. So small robot company was founded by my business partner and I, really coming together at a problem from two very different angles, I suppose. My background is in service design, user experience design. So I did a lot of work way back in the day in web. So did the very first web user experience stuff back in 99, 2000, and then got into mobile and various other bits and pieces, and ended up working as Chief Experience Officer at Ordnance Survey. And then via driving into work very early one day in the morning, I got introduced to the problems that were happening with arable farming, listening to Farming Today on the radio. And so, as you do. And there was a chap on the radio who, at the Oxford Farming Conference, which is like the big shindig for arable farmers. And he, just before him, there'd been a chap from John Deere talking about how all the problems with arable farming and how they weren't profitable anymore, and having problems with yields and all sorts of stuff could be solved by bigger and better vehicles. And then this chap came on, and he wasn't an engineer necessarily. He was an academic from a university called Harper Adams. And he started talking about how everything that the chap before said was wrong, and how farming didn't need to get bigger and more industrialized and more mechanized. It needed to get smaller and more precise and more accurate. And the only way to do that really was to use autonomous vehicles, small autonomous vehicles that could start to care for the crop in a very different way, and start to treat the crop as individual plants rather than sort of field size. And this just blew my head off. It was like the most amazing thing I'd ever heard. So nearly crashed the car. So I got into work and emailed him straight away, and I had a call with him at lunchtime, and we sort of carried on talking for a while, and I was very excited. And it turned out that nobody was really looking at this. And after a couple of months, he said, you know, there's this chap, a farmer just down the road who's just had the same realization, but from a different perspective. And he introduced me to Sam. And Sam actually came for this from going back to work on his family farm, and he was going through the books, and he realized yield, or created any more yield per hectare in 2016 this was, than it had in 1990. And this wasn't just for his farms, this was for all farms. This is just the way that arable farming had gone. It had hit a plateau. The third agricultural revolution that had started with the tractor sort of back between the wars had essentially come grinding to a halt just before the turn of the millennium. And so he sort of came to the same conclusion. There needed to be a change, some sort of radical change, and he went to see what this chap, Professor Simon Blackmore, was doing, and got in that way. And we got introduced together, and we sort of realized that the big problem was not necessarily the technology, although there's a lot of technological issues to solve, but it was more about just understanding what farmers viewed as a problem and trying to solve their needs. Obviously, that's my background, so I see everything as user experience I hit nails with. So we did a lot of interviews, met a lot of farmers, and we came up with this idea of, instead of automating a little bit of the process, just replacing essentially the whole system. So everything from before you put the seed in the ground through to just before harvest. And instead of just having one robot that does one thing, looking at maybe a suite of robots, a service of robots that could do that, and completely changing the business model. So looking at it as a service. So instead of getting farmers to buy these things, getting them to pay a yearly subscription on a per hectare basis. So we came up with this idea, and then we started to look at all the functions you needed to do, and we came up with this sort of three robot model that we called Tom, Dick, and Harry. We originally wanted to call it Huey, Dewey, and Louie. I don't know if you
Oh
remember
yes,
the film
yes,
Silent
yeah,
Running.
very
Yeah, yeah.
much. Yeah.
So our old hippie sci-fi film from the early 70s, I think, with Bruce Dern in it. And those cute little robots that sort of walked around like this, called Huey, Dewey, and Louie, they did all the sort of looking after it. And so that was our inspiration. But then we were advised very strongly that Disney are quite literal about stuff like that. So we thought we'd choose a different name. And also I think we want something a bit more English as well, because we are much more about the the English style of innovation and invention, than I would say the American sort of Silicon Valley way of looking at the world. Surely
people were shouting "Burn the witch" at you and your colleagues because because that's the idea is to upend farming as we know it, and to a large extent to undo what that drone world, should we say, says, oh look, we can improve farming no end by doing this, that and the other, because you're much closer to the crop. You're going to always be far more accurate than a drone's going to be with its survey or whatever else, because you're right on top of it. So surely there is massive resistance to this, or is the idea that the third agricultural revolution is broken? Is that an accepted fact now in the agricultural world, or is that still just mystery?
So for some people it's not. There are some people who think that the way that farming works now is fine, but to be honest, very few now. It's amazing how things have changed over the last 2 years since we started. When we first started, I would say maybe 3/4 of the people we came across were like, why would you want to replace the tractor? Why would you want to do this stuff? But as time has gone on, I think they've realized. I tell you what's really happened is farmers have suddenly become aware that their subsidy is going to go.
Right.
And it's very easy to forget rather how much the farming industry, particularly arable farming, is held up by subsidy. And subsidy based on area, based on the amount of hectares or acres that you own. So I think it's a crazy number, like sort of it's more than 95% of arable farms would not be profitable without subsidy, and quite a few of them are not profitable even with subsidy. So a lot of them are really, really struggling, and they're really worried about what's going to happen next. With all the stuff that's going on. Not mentioning any words, so they're all a bit nervous about it. And I think that so Sam's got this expression. He says that whenever he starts talking to farmers about what they're going to do, what their long-term vision is, they use what he calls the language of hope, which is we hope that the price of grain will go up. We hope that there will be some breakthrough in efficiency on tractors, which will mean that we will be able to get more out of less, etc., etc. And the reality is, it's not happening. The changes that are happening at tractor-based systems are all very incremental. 3% here, 5% here, and it takes a rubbish year's worth of weather to absolutely take things out. So there really is a need for change. And when we started going to talk to farmers, it was absolutely fascinating, because they, I would say of the 50 farmers we spoke to, 20 of them ended up becoming our customers pretty much straight away. They paid upfront for a service that we hadn't built. We were nothing like building, but they wanted to be part of it from the outset. Probably about 20 of them said, "You're nuts, I don't know what the hell you're talking about," and 10 of them said, "Well, we'll believe it when we see it." And it was like that. It was more than half really got the idea, and 20 of them are willing to take that step forward. But in terms of sorry, Gary, carry on.
No, carry on.
Well, I was going to say, the thing with the situation with drones, I think that there is a huge value in having that sort of granular understanding of what's going on with the crop, and I think that to be able to use that and take that and apply that effectively, excuse me, I'm just going to switch my phone off, sorry about that, to apply that effectively is like the ideal solution. And we know that what we're doing, we're designing a service to work within itself. We know that there are going to be multiple ways of being able to do this. Some of those ways will incorporate, sort of drones being able to provide information for ground-based systems to act on those, what the drone's providing. it's a big market. There are, at the moment, in the agricultural world, there are 20 companies, all of which are £5 billion plus worth. So there's a lot of space. But it's around precision, it's around data-driven insights and decisions, and that's a huge step forward for farming.
So the three robots, I think I've heard you say seed, feed. Oh, am I still here?
Oh, sorry, just a little bit broken up there. Sorry, carry on.
All right, the 3 robots, seed, feed, and weed. I think I've heard you say.
That's right. That's right.
So what does that mean? Unpack that a little bit more.
Okay, so Tom, Dick, and Harry, the way they work is Tom is a monitoring robot. The ultimate goal we have for Tom is that he will live on the farm. He has a kennel that he goes back to, recharges, and uploads data, but just goes up and down rows every day. So we aim to get a coverage of seeing the crop every 2 weeks. So Tom can cover 200. The design is that Tom will cover 200 hectares in 2 weeks. And that information is then uploaded to the kennel, which has an edge-based AI, so we don't have to upload things to the cloud. It all happens sort of in the kennel, and then the intelligence is sent back. And then we have hi James.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good.
I'm sorry, I'm equipped with some chips.
Oh, very good, very good, very good. But yeah, the rules, if you do that, you have to share. But anyway, that's another thing. We're just hearing about Tom, Dick, and Harry, agricultural rovers.
Okay, sounds interesting. And where's Ian tonight? Is he not
Ian's coming shortly. He sent me an email. He'll be along shortly with his controversy, as ever.
Excellent. Sorry, Ben. I don't think
that's okay.
Before, have I?
No, I don't think we have.
So so I've probably missed it. So I'll let you two carry on your conversation while I.
Okay. Well, I was just talking about our service of arable robots. So starting with Tom, who's a monitoring robot and collects data on the farm, lives on the farm. At the moment, we have to take him out to a field and let him run around a bit, but ultimately we're doing that, and collects data using all sorts of cameras. We collect, I think it's 6 terabytes of data a day at the moment. It's quite a lot, mainly because we're still taking that data and using it to reinforce and train the machine learning algorithms, and they are. We don't know, if we're honest, what parts of the image they're using. So we have to have raw images. We can't compress them yet because we need to really sort of start running counterfactuals so that we can understand what they're learning from. But then the information from that is then sent to Wilma, which is our sort of brain, if you like, our cloud-based system that then converts that intelligence into instructions, and then we send out Dick and Harry, and slightly the wrong way around, but bear with me. Harry is a planting robot, so the seeding part, and because the big process what we're trying to do is to take the weight off the fields, we're sort of trying to introduce robots that have the same compaction level as your foot, rather than the equivalent of a 40-ton tractor driving on the field. So Harry doesn't, obviously can't drag a plow through the soil, but also because it's very light, doesn't need to. So it just plants the seeds in the ground rather than having to sort of fluff up the soil before it puts anything in there, which means that we can plant into last year's stubble, which means that the root systems stay in place, which means the topsoil doesn't get washed away, all sorts of benefits around that. So that's sort of the seeding bit. And then Dick is crop care, which is sort of 3 main systems. One is weeding, which is using electricity. So we're working with a company called Rootwave, who've developed this very clever system. It's not really very clever. It's they've made it work very well, which is literally just using small bolts of lightning to blow the shit out of crops. And if you get close enough to the base of the plant, you destroy the roots as well. So it acts just like any systemic weed killer would do, and takes out the weed completely. It turns out from the test that we've done, it kills all the weeds that you need to kill in an arable crop, things like blackgrass, which is a real baddie, and cleavers and things like that. It's all fine. It struggles at the moment with sort of pots of pansies that we buy from Asda, we think that there's clearly a level of hardiness that's required from an Asda bought pansy that you just don't see in a field. So they take a hell of a lot of electrocuting to kill. Also, any weed, as it turns out, takes a lot more electricity to kill than a person. Go figure. So yeah, just so we have to wear these really protective yellow
It's interesting
wellies.
you talk about black grass, because I remember back in the, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago when people started operating with drones. One of the big things in agriculture was being able to map where the black grass was. But there was one thing that I always sort of had in the back of my mind, which was, well, why not fit them on the ground machinery to be able to detect where the black grass is when it's being sprayed, rather than detecting it beforehand and then sending out a sprayer afterwards. Like, if you're doing variable rate, then surely you can fit camera systems on the actual vehicles. So it sounds like you're sort of one step ahead of that and actually sending out robots to do it.
Yeah, although we are still doing that sort of monitoring in one robot and then killing with another robot. Which and the main reason we're doing that is because if we're going to have a robot that's on the farm all the time, it needs to be relatively cheap. So we've spent a lot of time making sure the components, the robots are building up a sort of relatively sort of low cost sensors and stuff to be able to work. And then the really expensive stuff, which is, to be honest, with the electric weeding, it's all in the batteries. We have to carry quite a lot of power around to be able to make that work. But that's something separate. But then we've sort of come up with some fascinating challenges around how do you, when you see a plant, if you've got an accuracy of around about 2 centimeters, there's a lot of plants in the field. How do you tell them apart? How do you know which is a weed? How can you go back to the same weed and kill it? And that's definitely a combination of like pure GPS wizardry, which you guys know very well, and computer vision, so that we can sort of get that sort of final few millimeters, if you like. So it's quite a challenge to be able to take out just the weeds and not the wheat plants, but that's something that we're just sort of getting right at the moment, and hopefully they will have commercial trials of that from next October to plan.
So obviously that gets rid of all sorts of nasty chemicals in the soil as well. So a couple of years of electrocution will probably show results in the soil quality as well, I should imagine. Well, it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're hoping for. So we have really plugged into this sort of regenerative agriculture thing that's going on at the moment. And so we know that the real benefits of what we're doing won't really happen until we can sort of remove from the field. But
have you taken the system to Ambridge yet for the rewilding project that I'm hearing on the Archers?
Well, who knows what Porchester Land have got up their sleeves, hey?
Exactly, because of course, what's her name? It deals with robots for the strawberries, doesn't she?
Yeah, I know. That was the most brilliant storyline ever. We were desperate. Well, the agricultural story editor actually follows us, which is quite nice. And it was one of our ambitions. Is like the first was to be on Farming Today, which was where sort of Sam and I got my inspiration from, and the other one is to be on the Archers. We haven't quite made the Archers yet, but hey, if
that's the big league. That is the big league.
I know you've really made it. We're on Countryfile though. We thought Countryfile's got to be, that's pretty big.
But was it John Craven? Was it John Craven?
No.
It doesn't count then, does it? Doesn't count.
No. Definitely B team Archers. B team Countryfile. Yeah.
Now, so you said Harper Adams, so that's a hands-free hectare, I guess.
That's right.
Pulled out of, yeah. So hang on, let me just think some more about this. So what is the size of the largest machine then? Because if you're going for the weight of a footprint, then you must either spread it out over a huge area or be really tiny.
So the target is that we keep the main weight to less than a ton, and on some pretty soft, chunky tires, so that we can spread the weight out. And that's for the doing robot. So that's the Dick and Harry. Tom is really light. It's about 120 kilos, I think. Smaller, narrower tires, but is still pretty light. So yeah, the compaction level is very small. And what we found over, with the weather as it is at the moment, we found that the mud as well is something that we can sort of go over and round rather than through and getting bogged down. I mean, it's still, proper good Cambridgeshire mud sort of sticks to anything, so it still sticks. But there's a great shot of from the recent thing we did at Wimpole. It was on BBC Look East and various other things, of Tom sort of traipsing across and through the tracks of tractors, which had basically got bogged down in the mud while it was there. So, but yeah, so sorry.
No, I'm just getting. So it would go direct, or does it work in a lawnmower pattern as it goes over the field? Does it need to, or because in theory you're making lots of little tracks rather than two huge tracks? If you see what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it would make lots of little tracks, but so with the design of Tom, which you may have seen, the sort of the bigger Tom, which looks like a giraffe with horns, I suppose, is sort of lowered for some sort of bizarre charge. Everything is designed around fitting within the wheat. So the width of the wheels and the width of the sort of steering arms and all the rest of it are designed to fit within the rows of wheat. So it's not making tracks, it's sort of following the rows.
At the standard sort of standard planting distance or width from the planters that are out there at the minute.
So I can't really go into too much detail because we've got some patent stuff going on with that, but it's around it's around placing seeds rather than cutting furrows in the ground and dropping seeds into it. So it's a very, very different model. But so again, we were lucky enough to win a competition for the Institute of Engineering Technology at the start of 2018, and that allowed us to work with the MTC, who were a brilliant bunch. And they basically stripped everything back to first principles and said, right, what are the tasks you need to do in planting? You need to make a hole in the ground, you need to drop the seed in it, you need to close the hole up, and this is the speed you need to work at. And most importantly, this is the draft force, the maximum draft force you can have if you're going to have a vehicle of this weight, sort of carrying this stuff along.
So at the end of the day,
it's extremely low draft force, extremely low drag to make it work.
So at the end of the day, you know exactly where you planted every seed, and you're monitoring the health of each plant, not an area or a patch of the field, but each plant that's gone into the ground.
So that's the target. So at the moment, we now have a service. The first service that we're running, which we started in October, is a crop monitoring and weed mapping service. So we are just basically going out and photographing everything and then using the AIs to recognize where the plants are and then telling the difference between wheat plants and broadleaf weeds. And that's on a per plant basis. And so we're getting paid by the farmers for this, or it's sort of running down the prepayment they've already made, and that's with Waitrose at Leckford, National Trust at Wimpole, and another couple of interesting farms sort of around the country. And that's, with that level of detail has just not really been done before, not on that scale anyway. So it's quite fascinating. And to be honest, one of the biggest values that the farmers are seeing at the moment is not so much where the where the broadleaf weeds are, because they still don't have the systems to be able to go out and sort of precision spray those, not to the level of detail that we provide. But it's as much to do with looking at where the crops have emerged. So, they know they've got X number of seeds in this row, and we can tell them how many of those seeds have actually emerged, and so what proportion of seeds are germinating, which they've never been able to do before. So.
One question I've got, it sort of links back in with the black grass, actually, because I know one of the biggest problems was actually being able to determine or differentiate between things like wheat and black grass, especially at the early stage of the season. They look very similar to each other. Really, the only, people were looking at sort of spectral signatures to try and determine the difference. But actually, I think a lot of people found that the way of determining them was actually more in the crop pattern, to do with sort of geometries rather than the actual.
If they're not in the row, they're a weed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are ways you can tell the difference. So there are spectral matches, but they are not perfect. Similarly, you can tell difference from morphology, but again, that's not perfect. And there are a number of different methods you can apply, and our confidence level from our AI training is not high enough yet to deploy that with any sort of degree of certainty, and that's really our focus for this year, is to move from being able to definitely tell the difference between wheat and broadleaf, and pretty much between wheat and grass, to getting that level up. And we've turned out we're having to layer 3 or 4 different lots of data to be able to get that right. So there's an awful lot of work for that. But the advantage that we've got is because our cameras are essentially taking 1-to-1. So we've got I think it's around about 0.5 millimeter per pixel view, which allows us to get a really good accuracy on the plants. But even so, as you know, with the plant leaf shape, it's an absolute bugger.
Yeah, I can tell you're not coming
I
from.
don't know.
Well, as I say, James, I can tell he's not coming from the drone world, because if he was coming from the drone world, he'd have told us they perfected it. It's available now. So yeah, it was one thing I didn't say before you came on, is we don't allow common sense here, and I think I'm going to add honesty to the list as well. It doesn't happen in our industry. It's quite rare.
You also claim that you're the leading agronomy software company in the UK or something like that. So that seems to be the typical claims within the drone arena. So you're doing well already.
We are the leading muddy field mapper in the world. I mean, we can map a muddy field down to the nth degree. We're also extremely good if you leave the robot sitting for a length of time and watching worms coming up and wiggling across and going down another hole again, which is always quite sweet.
Awesome.
Yeah.
There'd be value in that, wouldn't there? If you could map the number of worms per hectare, and also mapping his traditional mud. I mean, there are when you're that close to the ground, but you're going to see some big changes in that soil and what happens over the years. It's surely going to get harder as you improve the soil to everything. Hopefully there'll be more there. Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be more there. It'll be better quality, more worms, all that sort of stuff. I think the changes that need to happen over the next few years in farming, I think this is the big thing, right? Is everyone's suddenly woken up to the fact this is a real issue, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be resolved, and just the incredible stuff. So there were some photos that came out. I think they were 2010, 2011. It was like a satellite image of the UK, and it showed out of the Severn Estuary, I think, and the Thames and the Humber, just the plumes of mud coming out, which are basically that's all our land, right? That's all the stuff we're supposed to be growing plants with is now in the seas, and of course because it over oxygenates the water is damaged. It's nuts. So, particularly with the introduction, we would say for now in the medium term of zero-till and min-till systems, people waking up to the idea that we've got to be more regenerative, and the fantastic work of people like Cotswold Seeds in creating these very clever but quite old-fashioned ways of being able to regenerate soil. And hopefully, with our system as it sort of starts to come online properly, then there's some really exciting stuff that we can do to sort this out.
So why would I hire you? Why wouldn't you sell all of it to me and you'd always have it as a service? As a service, it does seem to be quite the thing at the moment for any number of them.
So, when we first started talking about farming as a service, it was actually a joke, because I think Uber just came out of this idea as mobility as a service.
Yes.
And so originally, and I hope Professor Simon doesn't mind me talking about this, but he said that his vision for the way that robots would work was that you'd have, it'd be very simple. You'd have a robot that would do a task. You go out to the robot, you'd press the button, the robot would go out and do the task all day, it would come back, you'd press another button, it would stop. And I think that from working on just ever more sort of automated and clever systems. Previously, I'd been doing a lot of work around conversational commerce and sort of AI design and conversational design. And, the idea of that sort of hard stop, interaction, is I think is slowly going. And the idea that you press a button for something to start and something to stop seems to be sort of a bit laughable. And the fact that you would own that would be a bit laughable. So the idea of having something which actually just did it because it knew what to do, rather than because you were telling it what to do, sort of crept in. But then really when we started to go out and talk to farmers, it became really clear that one of their biggest fears was around obsolescence. They love the idea of technology. There's a brilliant quote from one of our advisory group who said that for a farmer, farming is 40 experiments, right? And those 40 experiments, a farmer's got free will to do whatever they want. Literally, they could do nothing. They could, try and grow heffalumps, whatever. It's completely open. So they're really open to the idea of trying stuff out. But what they really fear is buying something that's a pup that doesn't work, they can't fix, they don't know what to do, and beyond that is buying something that costs Humpty Dumpty pounds and does X 1 year, and is Humpty Dumpty over 4 and does X times 4 the next year, and they're just made to look like an idiot. So by introducing a service, we're essentially taking that risk out of the equation. So we replace, it's our kit, so we replace it as necessary. If it gets nicked, we replace it. If it breaks, we replace it. That's all our risk. So.
I know where some of these trials are. I can go and get myself a robot if I'm.
Yeah. So we're driving it out to the field at the moment. But as you well know, with it's the same with drones, right? You know where that drone is to within a centimeter or a couple of centimeters in 3 dimensions. It's the same for us. So we know some charmer picks that robot up or does them with a drone. That something's gone wrong, and it's permanently connected. We use Sigfox, but you can use LoRa. You can use all sorts of stuff to have that continuous communication.
What's Sigfox coverage like in the UK now?
It's all right. So in some places it's a bit ropey. But where we are, it's fine. So we're okay with that. We know that if we're going to carry on using that, we might have to stick in some masks or we go to LoRa. The advantage with Sigfox is actually less for the robots and more for the IoT units that we use, because it's very low power.
Well, funny enough, there's a new internet service provider in our area of South Africa here, and one of the things they're rolling out is Sigfox farming stuff, IoT sensors. And I happen to know that the Sigfox coverage here is absolutely hopeless. It's just interesting to hear that it's being spoken about.
I think that it has potential when it's in place, and obviously if you have a point, then it covers a lot of area. And one of the advantages we have is that we're putting in infrastructure. So we're putting in the kennels, and there's a huge amount that we're still exploring what we can do with those, but ultimately we have those fixed points. There's been a lot of talk around from various people around how you power those kennels. Whether those kennels use infrastructures, so it might be Sigfox, it might even be like 5G network. We don't know, and we're working with lots of partners to explore what those possibilities are. Because we're obviously very keen to be adopted as widely as possible, but 2, if we're there, then if we have a chance to try and support rural infrastructure, and I'm sure in South Africa it's a hell of a lot more sparse than it is here, but it's like in the UK, you get outside of London or Birmingham or wherever, and it's just as hopeless as in the middle of anywhere, I would say. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Well, it must be nice to be working in an industry where you're not currently got new regulations coming out every 6 months and guys, keep changing.
It's got to be said, when those guys started flying around in Gatwick, it's the sort of thing that every nascent industry dreads, right? It's an absolute nightmare scenario because there's not a lot you can do about it. And we've actually tried to take some steps off the back of that, like literally off the back of the Gatwick thing and what happened with the regulation stuff. So we're aware that robots have the potential to be really scary. People always tend to assume that you're talking about Arnie, or you're talking about some big scary thing. So we started to do a lot of research work around human robotic interaction, to understand what people's fears were, motivations. Comes back to my user experience stuff, right? And then going out and doing some work with various people, including Waitrose, we work with already, but also a couple of other robotics companies, and a very well-known experience design agency called Method. And start to come up with some human robotic interaction rules around what we call real world robotics. So as we started to get into the idea of, well, how do we make sure that we sort of create the rules that we can then give to government, if you like, about what we're doing? The first thing that came up with is not just farming, it's also, the robots that are delivering pizzas on the street, or the robots that are cleaning the floors or stacking shelves in supermarkets or stuff like that. And we coined the phrase real world robotics, because these are the robots you'll see, right? These are going to be boxes on wheels. They're not going to be sexy. They're going to be these, quite normal-looking things. But the key thing about them is that the user, the person who has ultimate control and responsibility for that robot, is not the same as the person who will be interacting with it in the street. Well, not the same as the interactor. So we have to design a system which allows for the interactor to have faith and trust in what that robot's doing, and ultimately, and understand what the implications are around both health and safety, but also things like insurance, and stuff like that. And so we started to come up with these rules around it. And in fact, in the summer, Google very kindly gave us a spot in their headquarters in King's Cross to be able to launch these and start a sort of open consultation around it. And we invited along people from the government, so DCMS, BEHAVIOURS, DIT, to talk about getting them involved, with the ultimate aim that hopefully we'll be able to provide some clear instruction that they can then take on board as legislation. This is the idea. We'll see how it goes. But as I said, purely, really, the starting point was learning off the pain that you guys have gone through, because that's a shocking situation to be in, and awful that your industry is affected by a couple of morons. If I'm brutally honest.
Let's none of us in the industry believe it actually happens. But anyway,
You don't believe that it actually happened over Gatwick, or
no.
Oh, right. What do you think happened?
I think somebody saw the police drones the next day that were flying, and that kept the rumor going. Because on the actual incident, I don't know, James and James can't really talk about. James is from the big association in the UK, so you have to be very careful. We have to get him very drunk before we can get anything out of him, really.
Okay.
But I think it's one to take offline, but it's very unlikely that it actually happened. A chicken and several other animals. Go on, James.
All we know is there's only a few facts in the story, and you can fill in the gaps. But there were definitely some drone reports. There were definitely some drone sightings, and in the period of time when the drones were sighted, there were also definitely some police drones flying around. Whether there was any other drones or not, we can come up with conspiracy theories, but yeah, I think regardless, it's none of the regulation that's come out was actually down to Gatwick. It was all in the making anyway. The only thing that actually really changed was that it got sped up. All of this, there was
Oh, have I stopped everyone? No, I've added Ian. Did that kill everyone else?
Oh, James. No, I'm still here.
Only James. It's only James because Ian came. He was just talking about Gatwick. Louis here. We always talk about Gatwick when Louis is around. James was just talking about Gatwick, and he went away. How are you, Ian?
I'm all right.
Very good. We're talking to Ben, who's got some fantastic ag robots on the ground, Rovers, and some amazing stuff. Oh, look, James has gone. James has gone. So I'm very interested. Have you applied these rules, Ben, to or thought about the flying side of things? Did you bring those into the conversation as well?
So it wasn't so much around how the robots were working. It was really around relationships and what's going on.
Yeah.
So I can. Would you like to see them?
Yes, we would. You can share. Yeah.
This is. Let me just find the right. Bear with me, caller. I'm not sure. So I've got a deck, and I suspect that I will not be able to show the full deck, but I can probably do that. Hang on, what's it? Share screen. Share screen is easy with 2 monitors. Thank you very much. It's really good. Share screen. No, application window.
If it's in a browser window, you'll be able to share it.
It's in the deck at the moment. Hang on. Oh, it's not coming up. How bizarre is that? I think it's because I got it on full screen. Hang on, bear with me.
Yeah, sorry about leaving you guys there.
Awesome. That's all right.
You just ran from here.
It was Secret Service went and took my internet down because they didn't want me to say too much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, Patrick's coming. Oh, God. Oh,
can you see that?
Everyone's arriving out. Hang on, let me add Ben's. G'day there, Patrick. We're just taking some slides from Ben. Where did your slides go? That's where your slides should be, but we're not seeing it, Ben.
So might take a little while to get up to speed. Sometimes does.
Well, it is downhill to Africa, so it should be flowing down here quite nicely.
No, still no luck. Hang on,
no, let's not move it.
Try again.
Yeah. Well, you could even just tell us them.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Oh,
so
here we are. There we are. They're there now.
So very quickly, just go through it. So the 3 areas are really around purpose and behavior, then the relationship with its user. As I was saying before, the user is the person that has control. And then the final one is around the relationship with the interactor, who's the person on the street that the robots will be coming across. And really just understanding what the robot or what a member of the public can expect from the robots. So the first area is really around, as I said, the purpose. And the key thing here is around clarity. So this idea that, when you see a robot walking down the street, it needs to be clear what it's doing. It's traveling to somewhere. It's crossing a road. It's delivering a pizza. It's confused. It's banging its head against the wall. Whatever it is, it's like that single purpose is being carried out, and that is expressed as a state. And then if it's moving from one state to another, then that's clearly communicated. So if you're walking down the road or walking down the pavement and you're walking behind a robot, or you're walking through a field and a robot sort of coming across your path and then it suddenly stops, then you understand why it's stopping. And so is it broken? Is it going to start again? Is it going to bump into you? Is it doing something weird? All that stuff is clearly expressed. And then the final one is around the sort of universal expression of definition. So if you have robots in a field that when they do things acting differently to a robot in a supermarket, then people get confused. So you need to be able for that to be clear. The next one, I'm sorry, this is though some quotes thrown in here because I don't know if you've seen the EU ethics guidelines around trustworthy AI, but clearly written by a bit of a geek, and a geek with a nice turn of phrase as well. So one of the things around that we found is that we thought there were going to be these sort of highfalutin ideas around sort of the user and all the rest of it, but actually what it comes down to is it's really important that the control is maintained. So unfortunately, in real world situations, and this is certainly true as we're seeing with driverless cars, that you can't have a vehicle or a robot being completely autonomous. Because as soon as it is completely autonomous, then it has a legal personality, and that legal personality will then have liability. And there's all sorts of issues behind that that have nothing to do with the technology, and it's all to do with just the boring way that the world works. So the sort of the areas around robot and the user is this idea that ultimately a human will have or always have control of the robot, even if that control is looking at a screen 100 miles away with an open connection to be able to hit a stop button or to be able to make something happen, to make the robot do what you want it to do. That control always exists, and that connection has to be maintained, because if the connection is dropped, then the robot becomes fully autonomous, and then you have all these issues. So if there's any issues with that connection, then the robot will have to stop. And if anything goes wrong, then ultimately the user is responsible. And this is, I think we were hoping for something a bit sexier. Ultimately, these are the key elements. As the world stands at the moment, these are the key elements that has to happen between the robot and the user for people to have trust in it. And then the final one is around the interactor. So, there's a positive and negative relationships that a robot will have with the person in the street or the person in the field or the person in the shop. And the key thing there is that the human element must be protected against both privacy and potential harm. So getting a little bit Asimov-y there. So the first one is a robot will always defer to an interactor. So the idea that the way a human will perceive a robot coming towards it will massively change if the robot bumps into a user's feet and then a person's feet and keeps bashing against them, or if it stops, moves out of the way of the direction of the human and allows the human to pass and then carries on with its way. The human will different those two situations. The next one is that the robot will always act in the interactor's best interest. So if there's information that maybe the interactor doesn't have, then the robot will pass that on. So one of the examples, for example, we're working with a company called Zoa, who have created this amazing, it's a little bit like the Dogbot, but even, well, it's slightly less scary than the Dogbot. But ultimately it's for doing inspections in big factory and industrial environments. And that is, if that has, for example, radiation sensors, if it's in a nuclear power station. And so therefore, if there's radiation levels are too high, then it's all have a right, have an instruction to be able to tell people what's going on there. The next one is around the interactor needs to be able to communicate with the robot's user. So if a robot's doing something weird, the interactor needs to be able to go, "Oi, what's going on?" So, why is this robot here? What's it doing? Why is it wandering around the streets in circles or whatever? The next one is obviously when you're collecting data, as collecting a lot of imagery. Sometimes you're using that imagery for photometry or sort of clever things, but ultimately you're still getting pictures of people's faces and stuff like that. So an interactor has a right to know that their face is being anonymized, and they're not at risk of their actions or behaviors being recorded. But similarly, the interactor has the right to know what a robot's going to do. So, is it going down the street? Is it trying to cross the road? Is it stopped? Is it broken? And then the final thing is really around, if an interactor treats a robot badly, if it sort of kicks it or sort of gets in its way, or all the rest of it, then the robot should be able. I started by saying it has the right to, and then that got shot down in flames, but should be able to react. Now, if that reaction is being able to record people's faces, to be able to let them know that they're being recorded, to be able to call the police, stuff like that. I view it in the same way that, if somebody was walking down the street and then kicked somebody else's car, that person who owned that car would really want to know who the person was kicking their car was. And it's sort of along the same sort of lines as that. So they're the sort of rules that we were looking at the moment. We're progressing them and sort of interviewing people to find out what they think and seeing whether there's other ways of being able to use them, or whether they work specifically for different environments, different industries. But ultimately, that's sort of the path that we're going down at the moment.
Well, I noticed, Ben, that they were EU rules. Does that?
Yes.
That seems to be quite good timing at the moment. But are we actually going to be following them? Do you think? Is it going to be similar to the new EASA stuff coming through from in the drone world, where we align but maybe diverge in the future?
I think that, so the rules around ethical AI, as I said, are not, there's been a lot of talk. I don't know if you heard of the thing called the House of Beautiful Business. So there's been a lot of sort of conversations around how we can.
There once.
Pardon?
I went drinking with Patrick there once, but anyway, that's another thing altogether.
Might not be the same place, but it's an organisation which is sort of looking at how to adopt new technologies in an elegant and human-centered way, and that sort of tied up with this sort of stuff, which is really looking at, and the same sort of stuff going on in the States at the moment. So there's a lot of sort of federal investigations into how to make sure that AI is implemented in a way which is ethical. So whether or not it's those rules particularly, I think that for a large proportion of the world there will be some sort of rules around this. I admit in places like China, where they're a bit more relaxed about this sort of stuff, then they will probably have a different slant on it. But ultimately, if we start at that level, then it's easier to go down and go up, should we say.
Didn't Elon Musk went and bring out some kind of like AI governance council or something? I can't remember. Patrick might know a bit more about this.
I was just disappointed because I didn't see anything in there about giving robots guns, because I think it was when in doubt, give it 2 guns, and then we'll just work out the details later.
I think it depends on the state. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm with Asimov. As we move on with this AI thing, it seems like we move beyond Asimov's laws of robotics, which I thought were pretty simple and concise. And I know they've been added to or whatever. I've advocated here in Northern California, Silicon Valley, that possibly there be some sort of psychological examination or makeup that uses a story poll for programmers. And the reason that I say that is, does anyone remember a few years ago when Facebook had the computers and they were talking to themselves and then they started lying? Luckily, they were in let's say, a insulated environment. They started lying. And then to me, these aren't sentient beings. They don't have emotions and things like that. So obviously, well, I'm going to say obviously, to me, my hypothesis is the frailties of the human condition are translated into the software. And the AI, I got to be honest with you, for that reason, concerns me. There's a lot of good possibilities with AI, but again, I was joking about the gun, but everybody, as soon as you get, for military purposes, and I don't really want to deal with those frailties without the conscience. Even the human conscience is questionable at times, but no conscience at all, I think it's very dangerous.
I fully agree, and I think that even more than the conscience stuff. So one of the things that really sort of was driven home very quickly was, and this is particularly true in the States, I'd say, is around liability. Ultimately, and there's all that cool stuff that's going on. So one of the people who was on the board of when we were working through our rules was a UK-based company that's producing an autonomous vehicle platform, and they're working with a few of the big OEMs, and they're doing all sorts of stuff, but they can't get to full autonomy, and nobody can get to full autonomy. And the big problem around that is not around capability; it's around liability. And if you have to program in, the death of somebody, and this comes back to those lovely mind challenges that were put together about a couple of years ago now, where it says, if you have a choice between running over an old woman or a mother with a pram, which one do you go for, right? And
the worst attorney,
Sorry?
Who are they represented by? Is like, their attorney.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, let me just, can I just check your medical coverage now and see? But the thing is that if you have to make that choice, then liability then sits with the programmer, or sits with the product owner, or sits with the, and then nobody's going to want that job, right? And ultimately it's like, well, here's a cool job, you're going to be doing this cool tech, but by the way, if somebody gets killed, you're going to be in court. You know, and you've got that sort of, so it's not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen in the near
future. The more
future.
interesting one might be whether they had to choose between the Labour or Conservative Prime Minister. Like that might be heavily swayed by the programmer who writes the code.
There you go, Gary, right out the window. No.
Well, I think, you know, if they were both crossing a zebra crossing at the same time, you know, and the brakes failed on the car, then, with the old Prime Minister, I don't know if you heard this, she was famous in saying the worst thing she ever did was run through a field of wheat.
Yes.
So from our perspective, it's like, shit, let's be careful.
This is a concern with UAM too, the urban air mobility thing too. You know, here in the United States, there is no cap on liability for commercial air travel, and totally discounted right out the window. You know, the idea that Uber is going to get it down to 46 cents a passenger mile without, let's say, or rupees, depending upon what country you're in. I'm a true believer. But the thing with this is for this to happen, you know, you're going to say you have the $15 an hour Uber driver flying the car, you know, going to have a lot of AI. And when things go pear-shaped, you know, and you have one of these going to the side of an apartment building and, you know, they're having a party or something, you know, the liability is going to be $1 gazillion. All these people are going, oh, we're going to retrofit apartment buildings and garages and, you know, whatever.
With big cushions. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but these are going to be vertiports. So then you have the liability of the building owner, property manager, yada, yada, yada. And they're all riding on this. I mean, I don't know about you guys over there where you're at. I can't even get a good cell phone call wherever I'm at. I just want to be able to talk to somebody. The phone doesn't even work half the time. And I live in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you know, in the UK, you get things like this. So, you know, you can't retrofit my house with anything. You know, it was built just before the start of the Napoleonic Wars. So, you know, you're not allowed to go anywhere near it with anything. So yeah, the chance to do something like that. And also, you know, so I went on holiday a couple of years ago. So I used to live in Rome, went back there with my kids, and for some stupid reason, I decided to drive in the center of Rome. It's, you know, I've driven in Italy a lot, and it's nuts. I mean, it's nuts to a level that it's almost impossible to comprehend. And the idea that there's any algorithm that can work out the level of insanity that's going on the road. It's not, you know, there's no law-based system there. It is a system of you know, sort of gut reactions and you know, sexual attraction and I don't know, you know, the things that drive Italian are logic. And I, you know, our head of software development is a Roman who I've known for 20 years, and he'd be the first to say that.
You're going down the road. And that kind of, you know, when we were on the UAM, Gary, can you show us how Vertiport Africa is doing out the window? Or?
Oh, it's closed. It's raining at the moment. It's dark and it's closed. And if I were to, I have a spoof Vertiport here at my house, just as a thought experiment, if you will, or what business people make up words for all this stuff, don't they? But you know, but if you were to consider running it, and it just the weather alone, it would be closed most of the time. Low level air traffic that just pops up all over the place that isn't fitted with any sort of electronic conspicuity, all manner of things would get in the way of operation. And to get to these ridiculous passenger numbers per mile or kilometer, you just it won't happen. We've had urban air mobility since the 50s. We've had helicopters. And they're not. Why aren't they everywhere? Why aren't they on top of roofs? Why isn't it? It's just such a nonsense. And unfortunately, I am getting on my high horse. But unfortunately, that and drone deliveries are part of the big driver of regulations all over the place. Oh, Ben's, I got my high horse and he ran away. I know. Let's bring you back in. You dropped out there momentarily, Ben. They're the driver of regulations. These things. These people's fictional desires. Because it just won't work. And unfortunately, we're getting regulations off the back of it.
What I can see from the drivers, sorry.
Go on, yeah.
I was going to say, what I can see, the drivers of regulation. the majority of the time. The actual regulations themselves, you know, that you have the vision, you have the sort of opportunities that could come up, and then, you know, any attempt to implement those nearly always comes up against some sort of media-induced panic, which then the politicians of the day have to react to, because there's nearly always an election next year or the year after next or whatever. So there's something that's going to happen, and I hate to say this, it's only really in places like sort of China where you're going to see what happens if you don't have that sort of panic, you know. And, you know, I think it's going to be interesting to see the mistakes that are made there, you know, on all sorts of levels, and then whether or not they decide to work them through, or whether or not they, you know, brush under the carpet, whatever, who knows. Well, but
the liability issue is different, you know. And I don't know if you guys covered the hobby thing, and I was kind of hoping.
No, not yet. We're waiting for you. Well, Ben, would you? It's been fantastic, Ben. Please stay with us while we argue a bit, and if you can.
I'd love to if I can.
Can I jump
in? My internet holds out.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, let's get
the liability thing. Because I was going to say, in the UK, it isn't unheard of to sign liability for development. Because I've done software testing for the NHS, where to sign liability. So if a patient had died at the end, you would have liability, and that's with contractors. So it's still, I guess, coming down to a company, but it's still you personally. I was fortunate there because I was just dealing with the reporting function, so it was never going to happen. But it was a policy throughout that you had to sign that. So it wouldn't be a unique situation to ask to do that. You wouldn't get that with permanent staff, though. However, but I think artificial intelligence, I'd agree, does present, that would be a little bit scarier. That anyone signing up for that, you would certainly have to consider it very seriously.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that I worked for an agency a while ago, was working on some NHS Direct stuff, and it was a similar sort of situation, right? You know, when you're working through the user experience and you've got to work out what the flows are and all the rest of it about sort of diagnosis and stuff like that. It's a similar sort of thing. But the thing is there that if you get the diagnosis slightly wrong because you've answered the wrong question, then there might be a problem. You know, when you're dealing with the sort of the questions that you had with autonomous vehicles, for example, you know, somebody will die, right? It's going to happen. You know, it might not happen very often, but it's going to happen. And that one time, as you were saying, Patrick, that one time it does happen, you know, you bet the life that there are going to be lawyers there going, whoa, there's money to be made in this particular thing. And, you know, and if that's owned by an OEM, or if that's owned by Google or whoever it is, then there's got to be billions of pounds sitting there, you know, in escrow, waiting to go out to that sort of thing.
What's quite interesting when you start looking at AI really is, so my background from university was in verification and validation of software, hardware, looking at safety critical systems, including drones. And when you're looking at AI, actually, you know, verifying something like that, the whole point of AI is it learns over time. And so the only way that I can see that you can verify a system that uses AI is if you stop that AI from doing its job. You train it to a point where it can do its function, and then you stop it, and then you put it through some performance-based test, essentially, to say, okay, how reliable are you? You know, whether you use, you know, hardware in the loop or whatever for doing that. Having systems which will continuously learn over time, if that learning is attached to some safety critical function, then I just don't see that ever being able to be released into the wider public. You know, it needs to be constrained, and I think that's the key with AI. AI is a great tool, but it needs to be constrained for particular functions, and anything that is safety critical. You can't use AI on safety critical stuff. It's just you're never going to get that approved.
Well, you know, here's another. You talk about safety validation. You know, there was a story I just did it's on SUAS News. You know, I was looking at the fatality numbers for the United States and GA aircraft, and I don't know if you guys saw that, but last year we had 393 people die here in the United States in GA aircraft incidents. And there were also 189 people died on a 737 MAX. I included that because it got certification here in the United States. But we had 0 deaths from drones. So my question now is you know, this is something now we've been collecting, or supposedly collecting data. How many deaths do drones have to cause to be or have that same equivalent level of safety as manned aviation? And, you know, people are accusing me of cherry picking the data, but even smaller robots, I see here in Silicon Valley, they have kind of telepresence robots and some other robots that can do things. In a lot of instances, some of these helper systems don't weigh as much, can't, let's say, convey as much kinetic energy or whatever else. And I think that what I'm seeing is I think we're holding back innovation and the adoption of all of these systems, being way too cautious. Meanwhile, people are dying from, you know, how many people die from drinking and smoking, and you know, there's all these different statistics you can look at. Exactly, Gary, I'm concerned. So I think on some of it, you know, there's like the big bite of the elephant. People are trying to eat the whole elephant at one time. And I kind of hope that this is a segue into the hobby thing, because I know you had some, and I'm just chomping at the bit after an hour here. You know, I mean, I know that in the UK and whatnot, they had some hobby stuff come about. And then also today here in the United States, it was announced who was going to help write the test for the hobbyist. And some of those people that are on the list are people that threw the Academy of Model Aeronautics here in the United States under the bus. And now these people are going to be charged with writing the test for the AMA's membership. I mean, what do you guys think of that?
I'm just going to put them up on the screen here. I know exactly what you mean. Let's get them up there, shall we? Did that start working yet? Yeah, there we go. So
there's the list.
I mean, one thing we've seen with any tests that are done, they're always tests that essentially can't fail. They're just essentially a tick box exercise. Even with the CAA one we've got now for the drone register in the UK, it's not particularly hard. You just need to be equipped with common sense and an internet connection, and that's you done.
Well, I don't really care if it's hard or it's not hard or whatever, but you know, so my thing, and I've been beating this drum for years. Where is the science that proves that any of this hokum is needed? I'm not seeing any science that says we need to have tests for the hobbyist. What I am seeing is a situation where, and I don't know if you guys have Best Buy in the rest of the world, but it's this electronic shop where you can go and buy TVs and video games and drones. And I go in there once a year. Last time I went in there, I'm asking the girl, I said, hey, you know, you own one of these? Oh, yeah. And I use it. I do wedding photography and real estate. And I go, oh, so you have a 107, which is the remote pilot license here in the United States. What? You have a license, right? You don't need a license, you know. And so these are the people on the front line of the aircraft sales. And I've said all along that really the point of sale registration is what needs to be done. But you have companies, like some of them listed, and who will be working on the test, who don't want point of sale registration because it is going to cool sales. You get to the, look, we don't have any, like, I don't have to register federally to own guns. You know, I can go out and buy whatever gun I want. I don't have to, there's a database or whatever, but I don't have to register with the federal government. Buy a drone, I'm 16 years old, I got to register with the federal government. So I think, you know, this thing is kind of spun out of control. I don't know what's going on in the UK, but, you know, when I was growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money. I really didn't have even money to get into RC flying or whatever. But if I'm like, hey, guess what? I need something. I could get in trouble. It could be a $20,000 fine, Dad. Could I get some money so I could, you know, they'd be like, why don't you go smoke cigarettes behind the bowling alley and drink beer? It's safer. Right, Gary?
Well, what's interesting,
keep doing it, wasn't it? Just keep doing it, son. That's what he said to you, didn't he?
Well, what's interesting in the UK is that if you look at EASA, though, we've been on probably the side you're talking about, where the CAA have been very cautious with granting permissions. But you do look at some of the new EASA regulation, and it seems that they've kind of overshot the mark and kind of gone in the opposite direction. And some things that I've been hearing is actually what you're seeing here is the requirement being placed upon insurers rather than regulators to control the safety of the industry. And what we may end up seeing, and I spoke about it at the commercial UAV show, is more onus being put onto insurers which is essentially privatization of regulation in some kind of form, where basically you have to be insured to fly, but the insurer will set the requirements for what you need to do. And so I think that might be an interesting angle on it, but whether or not that's the way that we should be going or not, who knows?
I mean, with the I conflicted on this because the way the rules were in the UK anyway, they weren't based on science. I mean, the 150-meter rule effectively outlaws hobby flying in much of the UK, and there's no justification for it. When you find a Mavic, it is essentially ludicrous, and the very fact that in the US and there's other countries that doesn't exist, and that we're not seeing disasters there proves the point. And there is science behind it from the kinetic energy and so on. So I think the RC, you can say, yes, actually, that is sound. I would say, on the other hand, though, I am sure that likes of DJI have been lobbying. So this is one of the issues with Europe as well, is the bodies there, they can be lobbied by large companies that can essentially get their way. So I wouldn't be surprised if there has been some influence there. In the rules, they do suit large hobby drone companies. But that said, I do think that fundamentally they are sound but complicated. They would be hard to enforce with the way the rules are at the moment, because even most of us, you just look on Facebook, PIFCOs, experienced pilots. I'll happily confess myself, it's a complex. It seems to me quite complicated. You've got to look at charts and consider. And one thing that concerns me, and maybe the other Ian will have a better view on it, is I feel that it was potentially making open source a little bit more difficult to, be able to build a rig. Because I know at one time they were talking about if you built a rig, it had to be CE certified. So I was worried about that. Could see the end of hobbyists going out and building kit. So I'd like to know really a bit more about that. So I don't think when you're legislating, you ever get it entirely right, and that's what I fear about whenever we're dealing with a subject where there's, especially with drones, anything with the media and there's hysteria. You get your politicians involved and legislators, and you end up with bad laws, and we've already seen that to a degree. I mean, the very fact at the moment we've got, you can't fly a 250 below a tree line 5 miles away from an airport. That is just stupid law. No justification for it on safety when you look at those facts.
I think if you rewind the clock a bit, and Patrick and I have been around long enough to remember that AeroVironment were very much driving the weight categories back in the USA back in the day. So manufacturers have always had their finger in the pie. I can't remember. Do you remember the bins they had back in the day, Patrick? And it exactly fitted all their airframe types.
The different bins. And this is funny that you went there, because I was going to go back to this is the old timer talk with Gary and Patrick. Because I do say that. Now, remember, Gary, when we were, and this was Cap 722 doc time. This was prior to even, or during the archive, but I think even prior to the archive. Remember, with the RCAPA was going for a an exemption, and under 4 pounds. And remember, and I remember this is one of the first things that Gary helped me out with is the ICAO definition of frangible.
Frangible, yes. Small French pastry, isn't it? Something like that.
Well, it's the difference of getting hit in the head with a piece of foam or lead, kinetic energy, whatever. Anyway, the point with this is you remember prior to even the ban on drones, I was trying to relay this story to someone the other day that innovation was happening by the month, by the week. I remember, you would get up and you would get on the computer and you would go to, and then somebody's, here's the new configuration, and everybody, the whole crowd ran over to that, and that was the new configuration, or the new autopilot, or the new whatever component, or battery supply, or whatever. So what I see happening here is I see these arbitrary rules and regulations that are not based on science as a hindrance to innovation, not only in this sector, but also aviation. And I'm going to, I just did another podcast with somebody else, and this was another thing, and I know Gary knows the answer to this question. When was the first transatlantic flight of a drone or an UAS or a UAV? Does anyone want to venture a guess? Gary?
Aerosonde.
1998. I mean, Ted here and Andy Von Fleet flew basically it was an RC aircraft with an autopilot from Newfoundland, I believe, with Scotland or whatever. I don't know why they fly to Scotland. So the thing with this is this innovation was going on, and it was long before a Chinese toy company showed up. Not that I want to deride the Chinese toy company, because they make a great product. I will say that Mavic 2 Zoom, it's a game changer. Has anybody flown that yet?
Do you mean the little one or the commercial?
You're the one with the zoom lens, aren't you?
Yeah, the zoom lens. Game changer.
I've not flown with myself. I've not actually seen one used, but I've seen YouTubes of people that have used them and the zoom levels in, and it actually looks. It looks to me it's actually quite practical. For someone, if you say we're doing news reporting, that would be really quite handy for getting a good shot without having to worry about the distances so much.
That's one of the main things that you have is that you don't have to get as close to your subject as you can zoom. But also, I teach motion picture production for film and or movies and television. And, when you're flying the drone, a single plane aerial shot or reveal, pullback, whatever, is one thing. But really, you add something dynamic to it when you're on 2 planes. You're ascending and zooming in, or ascending and moving to a side, or doing an orbit or whatever. And it does give you that capability. But the standoff capability is really what I think adds to the safety. So I hope people don't think that I totally hate DJI. I don't like the PR people, especially here in the United States. We're having some serious issues with low grade policy and propaganda. But beyond that, innovation in aviation has happened due to models. So I'm going to give that one example of Aeroson, which then gave way to Scan Eagle and Tiger Shark, and a lot of other systems that are used, let's say, by military vendors. And not that we should all go to military vendors or whatever else, but even the B-52. So Boeing goes to the Air Force and is going to sell them this new bomber in the 50s, and the Air Force says, we don't want that. We want jet engine bomber. We want this. And so they're in some small town, and the engineers ran out to the hobby shop and bought all the stuff that they needed to do to basically model up a B-52. And the B-52 was sold on that. And so engineers have used modeling. It's a lot cheaper. All of this UAM stuff, it's like, well, it's just a huge drone or whatever. But a lot of the innovation and, let's say, children's or young people's first introduction to aviation is the RC hobby. I mean, that's probably how all of us got here.
Well, Ian's excellent Freedom of Information Act request in the UK, I think it landed today, didn't it, Ian? has shown how much money the CAA's made out of the £9 registration scheme. It's more than £500,000 it's standing at the moment, and that is something that is killing the hobby. It's killing the hobby and killing innovation. And we're all going to have to go and work for Ben and drive robots around the ground whilst there's still less, you know, a lot less regulation, especially in this nice safe sandbox of a farm. But that was good work. Good work.
And that's going to change, though. I mean, the thing is, and like we're seeing here too, in even with the drone thing, is I kind of see DJI and pull up the ladder mode.
Yeah. Oh,
you know, where the regulation at this point is going to favor everything that they're doing. And, you know, here in the United States, we finally have, after all of this time, what we have is we have a situation where people are starting to realize that we don't have a domestic industry. And we need to invest some money in this industry. And they're like, oh, you know, we're gonna give out grants for $100,000 or $500,000, and way too little, way too late. I don't want to speak. ITAR. It doesn't matter. You're never gonna match it. Never, ever. Well, not only that, but even if you say you went ahead and you got rid of that or whatever else, people don't understand. You know, I don't know how many people here have been to China on this thingy here. But when you go to China, you understand very quickly that there's a large investment in an ecosystem. And we talk about AI. One of the technologies that the Chinese want to be number one in is AI, robotics, quantum computers, drones, the facial recognition software and things like this. And they don't just like, oh, well, here, you guys go ahead and do whatever you want to do. There's an investment in an ecosystem, and then they pick a winner. And they've decided, hey, this is part of the plan where we want to be number one in this technology, and we're going to invest in that. Here in the United States, people ask me, oh, what do you think it's going to take to change it? I say the government would have to invest like $5 billion. Oh, that's crazy. Who's going to do that? All right, fine, don't do it. I don't care, don't do it. I do not see a free market. And the other thing that I've noticed in these Western cultures is the liability. The other thing is the Chinese company has come here and there's tons of patents. And I just don't even see how you're going to, you'd be able to start a company without being all let's say, in court on patent infringements. I don't see it. If they saw a serious threat, has anybody seen the Skydio in person?
No. Ian, have you seen one yet? Ian's got one coming, haven't you?
Yeah, no, I've not been able to. I might be able to bring one in from the US, but at the moment, the sale value is beginning to cause a problem. One went on eBay for over $2,500 the other day. Wow. So that side of it is kicking in now. So anyone who's ordered one or multiples are going to feed handsomely from it, especially this time of year with kids and Christmas and people with more money than sense willing to get little Johnny exactly what he wants.
Well, I've seen in person not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, the idea that it's a DJI killer, I think, is overly optimistic. I'm not going to, you know, I don't want to bust their chops, but I will say one of the things that kind of bugs me is the Wi-Fi control. I don't think that that's viable personally. They say, well, we don't even really need the controller. It flies itself, all the rest of that. The only question I asked was, you know, what happened to the prop guards? Because remember, you know, the other version had prop guards on it, whatever else. And I forget the gentleman's name, as the CEO says to me, we have software. And I'm going to leave it at that because basically that means something to me at this late stage in the game, even just say the Silicon Valley game where people are still relying on software to do everything.
I must admit, though, the software with it does look good. You won't really know until people are out there and using it, and you're seeing it with real use cases. I guess the limitation it does have is its cameras, isn't it? So it will rely on light. So once your light's failing, then that becomes a problem. but it does look quite impressive. And I know we've seen even in the open source there was an FPV fixed wing, I think, going at over 100 miles an hour and going through trees and stuff with obstacle avoidance, and did it very well. So I'm confident that you have got the software ability to be generally right most of the time, and they have warranted it, haven't they? That basically, if it crashes, you will get it all dealt with for free because they're that confident in it. But yes, you were quite right that even if it works now, all it takes is one dodgy firmware update with a bug in it, and the consequences.
And I'm not saying, I mean, I'm not saying that it's a bad system. I don't want to say that. Like I said, I don't want to bust anybody's chops on the deal because I didn't get to fly it myself. I only saw it in the play. However, for myself, as long as I've been into the drone thing and the technology thing, what I have found time and time again, that an absolute reliance on software is a recipe for disaster. And that's just, empirical experience.
It's in, to be fair, I've been following the S2 quite closely, very closely. It's one of those products that it changes the way you think, in the sense of you think, wow, this is a step forward, and it is. However, on the other side, it's interesting. Patrick brought up about the control link. It's interesting because, for instance, DJI have leveraged on something they started 6 years ago, is what got them to where they are today. Lightbridge was where we were at a long time ago, and it's interesting when you look at some of the things DJI have done well were really quite bad in the early days. They introduced this way back with the Phantom 3, and it was buggy and it had problems, but every version got them to where they are today, which is probably the best wireless control link on the market, period. There isn't anything that can go as far other than HearLink, and that's still in the early days at the moment as well. Skydio's biggest problem is really going to be, how do they sell this to people that it is different? It's interesting. They've suddenly become the only other option out there, in my opinion. I feel sorry for Parrot and Unique. I don't know what the hell's going to happen to Unique. They must be crying into their sleep because their market has just been taken away from them. They've been outdone overnight, and they've got no way of coming back from this. It would be impossible to think DJI won't have something very similar. They put out a video over 2 years ago showing what they called the Phantom X concept, which basically is what the Skydio is. If you go back and look at that video of a Phantom flying through the woods, avoiding the trees, if you change that image to a Skydio, they've got the before DJI. I would find it hard to believe they won't have something in 2020. I would just be shocked if there isn't something in the pipeline. I think Skydio have got the market at their feet, but so did 3DR. And it's interesting, as Patrick said, this is going to take the NASA moon landings level of funding to do it. This isn't going to be a couple of hundred. It's billions of dollars to create a market that is sustainable, and it is going to take 10 to 15 years to even begin to get a recovery on it. 5 years isn't going to touch it.
We've come from into was it 2007 or 2008, Patrick, where they're saying no way will there be a sub $1,000 GPS drone. They were just saying no way, it's not going to happen, never going to be, never going to exist. And
laughed out of a NASA meeting. Funny that you bring that up, and that was, I believe, in 2008, Gary. I was at a meeting here at NASA Ames, DOD, DOJ, NASA, NOAA, FAA, all of the American federal agencies, and they laughed me. There will never be $1,000 Chinese drone. Not happening. And the whole room was laughing at me. I'm used to it because I have people laughing at me all the time. I've developed a thick skin, but I'm like, okay, and it's probably going to be less money. But the Skydio thing, I have to agree about Parrot. I mean, I can't speak to the other countries in the world, but here in the United States, Parrot got rid of all of their Americans, and it was all French people. And
that's okay. They're okay. They're nice.
Fine. That would be like me going to Korea and saying I'm going to open up a factory and make TVs, and I don't really know anything about the Korean culture. I mean, it's stupid. It's not going to happen. what's going to have to happen, what I see, and this is a bigger harbinger of technology in Western countries that are or let's say have a way of doing business that's been around since the 20th century. Well, there are advantages to a one-party system, and I'm not advocating communism or the consumption of chicken feed because I don't like either of them. But it's a lot easier for them to maneuver. The systems that we have in Western cultures that are supposedly, let's say, representative type governments is not really the case. I mean, in the FAA here, people get lobbied by companies. Most of the people that were in charge of throwing out the boat anchor on drones in this country have now left the FAA. They hang out a shingle. I'm a consultant. I mean, when I see the names, it cracks me up. You know, here, this is a guy that said never going to happen. This is another person. Do no harm to my NAS, or whatever, and it goes right down the line. But boy, howdy, they get out of the FAA, and it's like, bing, you know, fog lifts. The unmanned aircraft system is the future of aviation, and we've got to do something about this. For 20 years. Well, while we're over here debating about, you know, even the farm drones and the AI and the rest of that, you think, well, I'm out on the farm, and what danger can I do? Whatever else, somebody is going to be trying to regulate that environment so it is good for them. And, you know, China's got a little bit of a different model. So we are learning. Even here in the United States, we just got the quantum computer title back. So the Chinese are more advanced than many of us would like to admit. And that's the punchline on that story.
I thought the other Ian there was in a new studio, but I see he's in another hotel room.
Yes, another hotel, another hotel.
Another day, another dollar. Another day, another day.
Yeah, in the real world.
It's funny, I was talking to Sarah about people because when I mentioned I was quite angry after other Ian's FOA request, and I was talking to the wife Sarah today and saying, "Oh, this is terrible. You know, this is what's happened in the UK," and she was reading off the names of the CAA guys that we met in Farnborough in 2010, I think it was, Patrick, or whenever it was you and I were there. And she's saying, but surely, old thing, you would never know this and this and that and the other. I said, no, they wouldn't. It's a wholly new crowd that's in there now. And they sort of, you know, politics have created the system that none of them, that original early crowd, were into. Oh, my word. Now Louis hanging around as well. I can't add you all in at once. I can't be done. I'm only allowed to have 6 people in this window at once. Oh,
I need time to say goodbye.
I'm going to drop off now, though, if that's okay.
Oh, that's perfect, Ben. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. You carry on with your chat. Do you know what? I've just looked up Skydio 2, and can I buy this thing? This is amazing.
Not yet in the UK. No.
Oh, well, I'm
probably
off.
Q4 next year, but it could.
Can you buy it in the US?
First orders are shipping now. They're back ordered until at least Q3 next year.
Okay.
So, as much money you want to throw at the internet, there will be models available.
Well, that's an incredible piece of kit. Anyway, it's been lovely meeting you guys. Thank you very much for letting me on your podcast.
I've missed it because I've been looking at the website. Sorry, I've missed you because I've been looking at the website, and that was right up my street as well. But unfortunately, I had a meeting I had to be in, so I've missed this one. I'll go and have a proper catch up and watch.
Drop us a line, Ian. Drop us a line. I'd be happy to have a chat.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All the best. We look forward to following with interest. Take care, Ben. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Cheers, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Gary, you know, I'll drop off in 10 minutes. So.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, Louis in at home. He's also I've got to jump on as well.
Where's James gone? We've lost James as well.
No, James, I've just put down the bottom down here until someone else falls out. But hang on. Louis, how are you? Even later than the other guy.
I was just trying to tease Mr. Simpson because after he caused that eruption of the volcano in New Zealand,
it was terrible. Terrible, yeah.
Yeah, I see. I just dropped off the show 20 minutes ago because I've been here for month and something. and we're still talking about Gatwick
We
regulation.
haven't mentioned Gatwick for ages.
Yeah.
No. I logged in, and the Ians are all riled up about Gatwick. But
Don't blame me, I wasn't here.
Gatwick once today.
I wasn't here. I only just come on.
I've been abroad, as you might know, Gary, and getting first-hand knowledge of how the drone panorama goes around the world. I've been in India, where they have some very strict regulations, if you want to speak about regulations, and they manage to live with them. They know how to live with them. It takes time and it takes paperwork, but the professional users are using drones normally in India. Let's just mention this last one. So I don't think, unless we come up with a crazy solution that sorts out all problems, I think it's a dead-end discussion at this moment.
But around here we call that Bruce, the crazy thing that solves everything. That's what we call Bruce, isn't it?
I wanted to flash back real quick. You talked about the 2010 CAA people, Gary, and you remember that photo of the two gentlemen from UK CAA looking at the RCAPA guidelines in Paris, and I want to say that was 2009 even, so it kind of predates that. And I want to go back to that because a lot of those people in the old days with the unmanned aircraft systems thing were definitely more pragmatic in Europe than they were here in the United States. And those guys, it's like, hey, I want to fly a 35-foot blimp at the Olympics in London. Okay, well, we can talk about that in a safety case and whatever else. That seems to have gone right out the window. And what I see is over here in the United States, it was like, this is going to be an $82 billion industry. This is going to save aviation. We're going to need lots of regulation. We're going to need to build up our CAAs, hire a bunch of people, start all these committees, start spending a bunch of money, and get where we have got today, which is somewhere where I think it's overregulated and too restrictive. And again, people think that they're going to make a boatload of money when they get out of public service as either being consultants or starting a drone company or doing something else. Agree, disagree, Gary?
Yeah, they haven't retired into the industry. That's the good number of them. They've just plain retired. So they've been quite honourable in that regard. I just think probably the reality of it is the guys at the Civil Aviation Authority are probably just as forward-thinking as they were, but they've got politicians sitting on their heads now, telling them that they've got to do stuff, and that wasn't the case a few years ago. But I think it is now. I think there's extraneous noise, unfortunately. I don't know. Do Ian's have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think the politicians and then the Department for Transport. And I think in the UK we can be our own worst enemy as well. You see it with a lot of the PIFCO groups, a lot of bitching and backstabbing, and people always getting the clipboards out and being silly over safety and rules and arguing with each other and going, "You've not done that entirely safely. I'd have done it like this," and it's just very, very frustrating. Just seeing an industry that doesn't really fight well enough for itself and isn't pragmatic and common sense enough. I just don't see the same thing with like the motor industry. They'll fight back and say how safe their products are, and there seems to be a more unified front there. You don't. I'm not close enough to it maybe to see, but I just don't think it's there because a lot of this stuff is out there on social media, and when I see other industries, all I ever see is kind of the positive and fight in their corner, and I don't see that with the drones. You've got to think about it. There has been a death with an autonomous car, and You know, everyone's jumping up and down and going, well, that's the industry dead. Look, you know, it's just continued on where it's always said, well, if a drone kills somebody, that's it. You know, we'll all be grounded. And it's like, well, why should that be the case? Surely you would look on that individual circumstance on the merits of it. How likely is it? You know, given that the bulk of drones now, you know, like 1 kilogram or less, it's practically impossible. And you speak to insurers in the UK and say, you know, how much do you really pay out? And, you know, they won't put figures on it. It won't be too public about it. But I spoke privately and they said, you know, we have very few claims. It's not big payouts. And that's why premiums are cheap. And premiums are, you know, fairly cheap. I know people operating commercially with, you know, premiums as low as 250 quid a year. You know, that's on smaller gear, you know, but you've got to inspire it costs and not what it costs more. But, you know, it's at the moment, you know, there's nothing there to say we need to be as alarmed as people like to be. And we know why a lot of the alarm goes on. It's NQEs wanting to overplay the case because they want people sitting in classrooms. And some people that want to pull up, you know, the ladder behind them and say, well, we don't want anyone else in the industry. I don't want any more competition. But that's not how an industry should be run. The people that have got the ability, they've got nothing to fear. And most of the people that are successful in the drone industry anyway have got companies where the drones come in as a value add. It's an additional service they provide. So it isn't the entire of the company. So I don't quite understand why we have the battles that we do, but I'd have hoped by now, in the years that the industry's gone on, that we would see more pragmatism, and it is there to some degree, but it's still not as much as I would like, and because of that, we're always there's always the fear we'll get more unnecessary knee-jerk legislation.
I don't wish, but I think the problem with the current situation is all my calculations trying to evaluate risk based on the existing figures have a big divide by zero error when it comes to fatalities, and that's really messing up my calculations.
He's exactly right. But I'm going to give you, you know, if I can, a little insight into the United States, because Ian, there's a lot of that frustration here. Why, you know, what's wrong with these people in this industry? You know, you supposedly have some smart people here besides myself. But
yeah, well,
the issue that you have is there is no science. I was joking a few years ago. Remember, there was a drone sighting was somewhere in London, I believe, in England somewhere, and it turned out to be a garbage bag. I go to the garbage bag manufacturer site, and they actually have, you know, a concise statement about what they do, some science backing up what their manufacturers are doing. There's none of that here in the drone industry. And, you know, going back to my rant about the AMA, you know, we also have AUVSI over here. Between the two organizations, this is a $30 million a year thing. And in what happened in the United States is everybody was kind of clamoring to be, in the AMA's case, we want to be the CBO, so we're going to be quiet. We're going to go along with the thing. I mean, where they're at today, or where they are with the Section 336 thing, I told Rich Hansen in 2009, mobilize the membership today, Rich. No, you know, we worked out a deal with the AMA. Their deal is that they were going to be the blessed community-based organization. And I've spoken to people that used to be employed there, and they said that they had meetings and they were telling everyone, get ready. We're going to have 1 million members here. And we're going to need to start hiring people and build this thing up to have our 1 million mandated members. So they had a financial, I would say, incentive to just keep the unwashed masses quiet. Same deal with AUVSI. AUVSI used to be the DoD vendors that were kind of running the program, who thought they were going to be selling $250,000 Raven systems to the police, which was never going to happen. And now you have a situation where we have a certain Chinese toy company that's on the board. And, you know, the rumor is that, you know, Tracy Lamb didn't leave because Top was a flop. I don't know if you guys saw that. I publicly apologized to her because I thought that's why she was leaving. Scuttlebutt is she was critical of a certain board member company. And so what you really have are you get these groups or front groups for the companies with a lot of money. And the end users, the small business people, the people creating jobs, and the STEM education people, backseat. And it's all on feelings. Even this registration, and Bruce may remember this, and Gary may remember this, that remember when we had drone registration, all of the near misses and the flying near airports and the sightings and all the rest of that was all going to go away magically because now we had accountability with registration. Remember that? You guys remember that? It's going to magically go bye-bye. And
Nevada never happened. That accident in Nevada where the guy got fined $20,000, that never happened because he registered.
Well, not only that, there's other questions that went down in an area that I thought they were geofenced. Geofencing, you couldn't fly, DJI aircraft. But the secret is really you can fly in, you can't fly out. But the other thing that gets my goat on this, another reason we can't get off the ground with this is, if you guys read the story about Precision Hawk over here in the United States, they have a beyond visual line of sight waiver where that Thomas Hahn dude was the guy who was responsible for beyond visual line of sight flights. He was gone from the company for 10 months. Nobody even mentioned it to the FAA. And then the FAA makes celebrity CEO Mike Chosin, he's going to be the chairman of the DAC. Did anyone check in? Hey, let's get Mike on the blower here. Hey, Mike, how's that beyond visual line of sight thing working out? Is it all safe? Is anybody crashing? Do you have any flyaways? Anybody getting shot down by pot growers? No? Okay, well, sounds good. We want to make you chairman of the DAC. Not even any of that. So you have 10 months. I emailed the acting administrator, Dan Elwell, Chow, her assistant, the guy who gives out the waivers here in the United States, the other guy that gave them the waiver, pretty much, a lot of people over there at the FAA, including chief counsel. FISDO people, the guy here in Sacramento, he said he didn't even know anybody was flying drones here. Okay. And I know it's kind of a long-winded story, but the punchline on the deal is I've never even gotten an email back from anybody. No one. And the FAA gave Precision Hawk a mulligan and transferred the beyond visual line of sight responsibility to another guy after 10 months. So these guys, the guy that got the $17,000 fine and the other guy that got the $20,000 fine, I'm not saying they shouldn't have been fined, but it seems pretty arbitrary and capricious to me. We hammer some folks and we don't hammer other folks. And you guys are out of the country, but talking to almost everyone that was on the PG&E contract out here in California, some got training, some didn't get training. There were no VOs. The camera operator was the visual observer. Like I said, shoot downs, flyaway crashes, whatever else. Nobody kept any logs. Nobody knows what's going on. And so I'm going to ask, over here we have this thing where we cannot compromise the safety of the nest. Can't be done here. But it seems to me that the safety of the nest was compromised for 10 months and you don't even have anybody looking into it. I'm a malcontent. I don't know.
Okay. But Patrick, how does the technology developed by the guys like Skydio fit on all of that? When you go fully autonomous on a system that has the capabilities of flying very, very far and no human operator engaged/involved. How is that you foresee that the authorities will deal with this kind of vehicles?
Scientifically, gonna have to use science. I know there's a big aversion to that and nobody wants to do it. But, I wrote another story that was on SUAS News, and I believe this is the United States of America, right? So we have large swaths of land, and you can mathematically calculate a certain level of risk. Say you have a drone that weighs half a kilo and can fly for 5 miles and, has a limit of however high, whatever. And you're Farmer Brown, you're growing corn. Okay. I live 25 miles from town. There's no air traffic over my fields. There's nobody around here. If this drone has a failure and falls into the corn, who is it going to hurt? I think you can use the scientific method to calculate this risk. And the other thing is people talk about beyond visual line of sight, and I think for certain aircraft that have kinetic energy or a mass that would cause a fatality with a kinetic energy, you're going to have some sort of certified system. Are the manned people going to buy off on a system that can fly beyond visual line of sight that's 40 pounds, let's say 20 kilos, with no onboard detect and avoid, sense and avoid? Let's go around the room. Gary, you think that's going to happen?
But Patrick, the Skyview thing can fly and can do sense and avoid by itself. It's a fully autonomous system with sense and avoid. I look like a Skyview salesman. I'm not. I don't even have a Skyview because apparently they're extremely sold out. But the thing is, when technology catches up and surpasses regulations, and we've seen this with the beginning of the drones that got every authority barefooted with this. Now we get technology that can easily be ported to larger vehicles. It's just a matter of them wanting to do that.
The problem is, though, with the logic of, you call it sense and avoid, but you can't use cameras to avoid aircraft. It's impossible. I did a 3-month project at uni looking into pixel sizes, and the actual kind of the kind of lens you would need and the amount of cameras you would need on board to be able to have a 360 coverage is insane.
James, technically, it's very easy for the guys of Skyview to add an ADS-B receiver and put it on the game.
Yes.
So technically, it's quite feasible and very easy. Even those cheap flight controllers, not so cheap flight controllers that you get for open source projects that are rainbow colored, have now ADS-B receivers. So I don't see the ADS-B thing as bad or good. It's something that exists. Sense and avoid, it's there.
Until it is certified, that's your feeling, Lewis. That's all there is to it. Until it is
granted.
Typically, I've got a scientific standard on the back of the envelope right here. Until it's certified against that, that's your opinion. And I'm not saying your opinion's wrong, because I'm pro the technology too. And I would think, if you had a 250-gram drone or whatever, and it material density and all the rest of it, I would totally agree with you. But as someone that's been in this business for a long time, if I've got to go sell that to somebody who is betting their life in a cockpit, it's going to be a hard sell, man. So technologically, I believe it's doable. Certifiably, that's another thing. But I think it is certifiable. But the CAAs have to establish the baseline. And then we've been after the FAA to establish a baseline for human eyeball being avoid for 20 years, and it's still not here yet. Establish the baseline. Let technology try to beat that standard, and then let them certify to that standard, and we're off to the races.
Yeah, because at the moment, if you go with a Skyview industrial product, you don't have anything to certify it against to.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, scientific airspace integration. Everybody talks about their feelings, and then, Gary, you were saying you got politicians sitting there. No politician. I wouldn't bet my career. I mean, those guys are, living in the lap of luxury. They get to go to the private clubs and fly around, make all kinds of money. And you think, I'm going to bet my career on some yahoo who comes in here, in a T-shirt, the ill-fitting, wrinkled T-shirt, and he's going to say, "Oh, my drone it's magical. It can fly. It can do all this stuff. Good. I'm all in. I'll bet my career. Let's go." That's never going to happen. If you come in and you say, "Well, there's these standards, and we had them verified by EASA or NASA or somebody like that, and my Skydio drone meets this whole criteria. It can fly around. It can deliver unicorn poo or whatever it can do." Then at that point, then people would have to say, "Hey, we got to do it." I mean, that's how manned aviation does it, right? I mean, it's a certified equipment, and we all get on the airliner and get treated like cattle. except for Bruce, who's a diamond flyer.
Is that what happened with that Max 787? The Max 8?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful example of the certifier's gone wrong, isn't it? It's a beautiful example of all of that. But other Ian's gone, but I'm heartened that the UK CAA has received its £500,000 so far for the registrations, because I will lay money. I'm going to put a fire in a freedom of information myself. I would lay money that far exceeds the amount of money that they bought in via the issue of private pilots licenses, which you only pay for once in the UK, commercial pilots and airline transport pilots licenses. And surely, if the world's fair, the people that pay, or the group that pay the most money, should have the biggest say. So
$1, one vote.
$1, one vote. We'll be able to change it soon. It'll be okay. We'll be able to get generation either up and out the way, hashtag no GA below 2K, or mandate that they fit electronic conspicuity. Because in our world, it is simples for us to get out of the way if these guys are equipped with something. If they'll persist in not equipping themselves, then what are we going to do?
Well, one thing that's come up recently in some discussions within RPAS has been, talking about the fact that drones are now the biggest air user in the UK. Out of all of the air users, drones and model aircraft is the biggest category now. So certainly we do actually have, we should have a lot of leverage there now. We're also providing quite a lot of money towards the CAA. If you look at our contributions with PFTO renewals, with drone registration, you start adding it, and OSC applications, you start adding it up, and you're talking probably 7 digits at least.
Comes over $1 million, James. I just did the calculation myself, funny enough, when they were talking about money, and just over roughly £1 million from PFCOs through standard registration a year.
Another $500 million from all the model flyers now.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely jubbly.
Well, you've got to figure out here in the United States, the UASIO, the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office, they have roughly 100 people attached to that office and a budget of $27 million a year. So you do the rough calcs on that. What is that? 200,000 plus man hours a year? What the hell are they doing over there?
Yeah.
PowerPoints.
Someone's got to make the coffee, mate.
PowerPoints are very hard to do, Patrick. You're
right. You got me on that one.
No, you know that PowerPointware is the craziest technical solution there is. It's PowerPointware, my friends.
I'm going to invest in this PowerPoint stuff. Well, my thing with it is there's a frustration. I don't think that the public is being served, especially at the amounts. And I do want to flash back to the equivalent level of safety thing. James was talking about, how much of the airspace actually drones are becoming users now. Gary remembers the equivalent level of safety that AOPA was talking about, and other people were talking about during the ARC. And I'm ready for that equivalent level of safety. So, if you're going to have some kind of remote ID on drone aircraft or small aircraft, how come we don't have the ID on all aircraft?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think one thing we do have to bear in mind, Patrick, and I've completely campaigned for your way of thinking for a long time in terms of, drones are extremely safe. You look at it, but they're extremely safe given the current regulatory conditions. We've had a set of conditions that have been in place which have restricted people. Well, those that abide by them, they've restricted them. We've not had these level of accidents. However, if the landscape does change and suddenly they open up beyond visual line of sight flights to any Tom, Dick, and Harry, which I don't know if you were on earlier, but you'll recognise the reference there. Then is that level of? Can you compare those levels of safety against each other? Probably not.
The only thing that the regulations have done is proven that the law-abiding people fly safely. Because here in the United States, during the Prohibition, and Gary probably remembers this also, with the one day we're going to be sitting around at the hut at the Vertiport, Africa, shooting the poo. But Gary probably remembers this during the do-it-yourself drone I mean, people were doing everything, flying 40 kilometers beyond visual line of sight and to 10,000 feet or 35,000 feet and flying all over the place. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people were doing this around the world. And we did not have this catastrophic event that people keep saying is going to happen. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen because I don't have a crystal ball or, you know, I'm not a drone Sigma or whatever. I'm just a lowly dealer in the drone. But I don't believe that without the science, you can say that there's this much of a threat. You know, even Bruce's thing, I remember back in the early days, oh my God, some guy down there in New Zealand built a cruise missile in his freaking garage and we're all doomed. And, you know, it'll be Saddam Hussein's going to be launching them against us and head for the hills and henny penny. And, you know, it never materialized. Bruce, were you not selling kits or, you know, what?
Oh, yeah, man, I had plenty of interest. But I mean, that's the point I like to raise. I predicted that this was a potential risk 20 years ago. And in those 20 years, nothing's happened. So, like, the risk isn't there. In fact, more people have been hospitalized by falling meteorites than by drones in the last 10 years. Seriously, should we start building meteorite shelters?
How many people have been hospitalized by meteorites? I need to know.
Over 800 in the Chelyabinsk incident. Yep. Mainly caused by shattered glass from the shockwave. People got lacerated and got sent to hospital.
Well, all of those were in Russia when that meteorite fell. But come on. Even in New Zealand with the volcanoes and everything, after you caused that explosion on the volcano, Bruce, have you cut it with those?
But that's the trouble with BV loss. You don't see the things until you hit them.
Well, there's an interesting data point here, which around BV loss. I do quite a bit of work with a few companies who are trying to go and get approval for BV loss at the moment. I don't know if you know Seas.ai, who are a recent one who got into the CAA sandbox. So I've been helping them, but from a guy that I work with quite closely, he does some work in the States. I'm not going to mention companies because I'll probably get shot, but apparently the FAA's quality, the reliability of a sense and avoid system is 0.4. So it has to be effective 40% of the time. In terms of if you are going to hit another aircraft, not if you're going to come into close proximity, but if you're actually going to hit it, then it needs to be effective 40% of the time, which is actually a lot.
OpenTX. Who's put their OpenTX on?
Sorry, James.
It's Louis. Of course, it's Louis. Goodness me.
but that kind of, that follows sort of, I think, most people's instinct that actually the reason why drones are safe and why there aren't that many mid-air collisions is because the sky is extremely large. And actually, it's really hard to hit other things. Even if you try and hit something, I don't know if you've seen some of these competitions where you see, model aircraft pilots try and, hit each other. It's actually really hard to hit someone, even if you're trying.
I'm getting better at it.
I want to do the statistics on that of getting a Phantom into a jet engine. The odds getting bit by a shark while making a 3-pointer and winning the lottery all at one time.
It's easier just to build a cannon and push the Phantom down the barrel of it and shoot it at the jet engine, isn't it? I think we've proven that already. The BBC proved that.
But there are more coconut-related deaths every year than shark. I can tell you that much.
More.
Do you know there was? I think last year there was four deaths from selfie sticks. So we definitely need to regulate selfie sticks, I think.
But this is the whole thing. It's not about safety. People, there's this perception it's safety. No, it's not. If it was about safety, we wouldn't have EASA rules suddenly making a craft with a camera require registration, whereas the same craft without a camera doesn't require registration. Cameras don't make them dangerous. Cameras don't explode on impact. It's all about control.
Safety and security. I think there is an element of security that does need to be looked at because, if people can spy, especially on politicians who are probably the ones who are worried about it, and people who are sort of maybe up to no good, then clearly, there is a risk there.
But James, remember what the politicians tell us. Only those with something to hide have anything to fear.
Yeah, well, maybe they've got something to hide.
I don't know. I'm not saying that regulation is totally a bad thing, but let's have regulation based on science. I mean, I just did another interview, and look, here's my frustration, right? I live in the United States of America. 50 years ago, this country, using that, we didn't use the metric system either, put men on the moon and returned them safely to the Earth.
Yeah, but the only reason you didn't use the metric system was it was a lot closer in miles than it was in kilometers. Lot smaller number.
All right, well, whatever the case. My thing is so here we are 50 years later, and you're really telling me that we don't have the wherewithal to integrate a 251 gram into the National Airspace System. Very hard for me to believe. It's just almost impossible for me to believe.
And what's this focus on integration? The thing we want is not integration, it's separation. Vertical separation provides all the solutions, including exclusion zones around airports. If you're not in the same airspace, there is no risk to anybody.
Well,
no GA below 2K. Hey!
I think Gary's going to have like a catchphrase.
Yeah. No GA below 2K. It's get them away. Get GA away. Be gone. And that pains me.
The thing is, you're quite right in that. But has anyone actually put forward a case to any of these regulatory authorities and said, these are the statistics of me coming into conflict with a manned aircraft at 400 feet, so therefore it's safe? And unless you do that, they're not going to.
That has been done. That's been done in New Zealand with our CIA, because you take basically how many cubic meters of air are there in the world below 400 feet, how many drones are there, how many manned aircraft. Even if they're all in the air at once, the risks of a drone and a manned aircraft occupying the same cubic meter of airspace is like 10 to the minus goodness knows how many. Statistically speaking, it's almost impossible for this to happen. You'd be better to buy lotto tickets, But the problem is regulators are not listening to facts and evidence and science. They're listening to politicians who read the Daily Mail.
Well, and I got to go back on this deal too. So there was another story that was on SUS News, and people saw this, and it was a heat map of the RPCs in the United States. And in a lot of the country, there's counties that have like one person in it that has got 3 people. So even in San Francisco, there's like less than 4,000 people. In Los Angeles, there's 4,000 people. But so I called PK up at NASA, UTM, and I said, hey, PK, I was trying to get SRC to lend me some radar. For those that don't know, radar is pretty expensive. But we have to figure out what's going on in this volume of airspace. How many people are flying a day? Where are they flying? How long are they flying? When are they flying? And before you can even design a UTM system, in a lot of the country, I'm not going to, I don't know for sure because I'm not doing the science. I don't have the money to do it. But the thing is that we may be, putting a brake on the wheel that's not necessary because there may not be that many people flying around. That's 1. 2, 737 MAX, fair-minded people on this show here today. If you read the Der Spiegel articles, the guy from the FAA said, I was on drugs. If I wasn't on drugs, I wouldn't have gone along with this. But any fair-minded person, you're going to put a new software into a system that was already certified. We're going with a new software. We decided to upgrade it, but you don't need any training. You read about it on the iPad. Have a nice day. I mean, I've been part of military projects. Some of you other people may have, whatever. I'm the first guy. Hey, that's complicated. Well, if you need a manual, you're a dumbass. Dumbass right here. I need a manual because I'm not going to remember all of the steps and procedures every time that I go and operate this system. And I'm not even flying anything with people on board. So the idea that it's all about safety is what I would like to call weapons grade bullshit. Because if it was all about safety, any fair-minded person would say, hey, you know what, I just hasn't passed the smell test to me. And in this case, the Boeing lobbyists get onto, Congressperson Bag of Donuts' phone and go, I got this jerk down here that's giving me problems, about my software or whatever. And someone gets reassigned to the Panama Canal Zone, like we saw at the FAA with the guy that gave Precision Hawk the waiver. he was the only guy that got back to me, and he got back to me immediately and said, well, I got reassigned and I'm down here in the canal zone. Which I guess is better than being in Barrow, Alaska, shoveling polar bear poo off the runway, But
so that first point you said about modeling airspace is there's a academic I know in the States, and I did quite a lot of work on this. A guy called Mikhail Kockendorfer, and I'll be careful on how I pronounce that. But Mikhail Kockendorfer, he's currently working with Zipline. But his whole work was all around encounter modeling. So he took radar data, he took all of these different sources of data, and he's basically modeled airspace so that you can put an aircraft through airspace and you can calculate the probability of it coming into contact with manned aircraft.
I don't like models. I'm going to be the first one to tell you that. Could garbage in, garbage out. 1, 2. I've witnessed with my own eyes one of the UTM, let's say, demonstrations up here in Reno. Okay. They had an uncooperative helicopter come right into their airspace. No TAMs were filed. It was all over the news. I mean, even this UTM thing is kind of like predicated that, like, I'm supposed to be in my airspace at one time, and that's not the drone industry that I know. The other thing with the modeling is I don't even know how you would even model something that you're not, let's say, sure of. Even these airspace models, nobody knows how many drones are flying around anywhere in the United States at any one time, or even aircraft for that matter. Because if they did, in the case of San Francisco, I fly on the Jeremiah O'Brien, and I don't know if anybody's been down there to Fisherman's Wharf, and I have a class there, and the helicopters and seaplanes repeatedly come in. The helicopters are less than 100 feet over the ship. And it's a populated pier with people all over it, and Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. Is that safe? I wouldn't call that a safe operation. Seaplanes come in very low, under 400 feet, and doing sightseeing tours. So I think if the FAA really knew that all of this was going on, and then again, maybe they do, and they just don't do anything about it, that does not sound like a safe dance to me. I contend that the FAA doesn't know what the hell's going on out there.
The thing is, though, Patrick, you say you want things to be based on science, but modeling is one of the main uses of science within risk estimation. So how else would you propose that it could be done?
If you don't know what the drones are going to be in that airspace, or you're not completely sure what the manned aircraft are in that airspace, what are you modeling? You're modeling the hypothetic. Your feelings.
Well, so the models that they use are basically using things like radar data, ADS-B data, and others. So it's, although the data is never going to be complete, you can account for uncertainty within models, and that a good modeler of anything should be accounting for some level of uncertainty within that. So,
well, they're going to be, but I haven't found. I would like you to find me some scientists that say that modeling is exact, because it's just not.
Have you guys looked at the George Mason University study where they modelled it on bird strike data? That's probably the most definitive work I've seen. And if you distill the numbers down, it says there's one risk of a death due to a collision between a drone and a manned aircraft every 400 years of operations at the current levels.
And I'm not even. What are we?
Drugs. He's doing drugs. He's doing drugs. Yeah. He's doing his drugs.
He's certified max 37 right there.
That's a lot of Viagra, mate.
Yeah, another reason to be demonetized. How many more ways can you people do this?
He's going to be crushing it up and rolling up a £20 note soon.
Well, I do believe that we do need, I'm not totally opposed to modeling, but what I am saying is that, okay, so if you have a certain volume of data, and this is what I talked to PK and NASA about, is doing a space tour, getting some radar, monitoring a volume of aircraft for a quarter, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, and try to build, a historical record of what's going on there, what's actually going on there, and then we can plug those numbers in there and model it.
Well, in the UK, there's a group called Airspace for All, and they're doing some great work with capturing, because they're concerned about the Civil Aviation Authority increasing the size of controlled airspace around airports. Farnborough was just sold, and it's had a huge increase in its airspace around there, and they're doing some great work. So I mean, there is data out there, and people are doing it. But wouldn't it be nice if all manned aircraft were fitted with electronic security devices that would allow us to grab more data? And as was shown when ADS-B rolled out in Alaska, whenever it was, many years ago, the increase in safety is quite dramatic when pilots know they can be seen and watched. The accident rate falls down because they're not so naughty as they were before.
Well, that was the even during the ARC. Okay, there was a lot of talk from APA and ADS-B, and there was an argument between ALPA and AOPA about ADS-B, and AOPA was like, we're not really sure that it's needed. We don't have it. ALPA is saying, hey, you guys are dragging your tails in the cloud, which you're not supposed to do, and you're doing other operations and yada, yada, yada. And the dude from AOPA totally protested on that. And there was a call made to the administrator after hours on that. The next day, well, there's an apology offered and all the rest of that. But you are exactly right, Gary. And what's happening with ADS-B is people's flight habits are going to be reported. And people cut corners and want to fly VFR, and they probably should be doing it. I do believe that's why there's been some pushback on this. The other thing in the United States is I do not think they're going to make the ADS-B mandate.
No, well, they weren't anyway. No, they knew last year it was impossible. They knew last year it was. It
is, and the other thing with registration I didn't hit on earlier is anybody ever tried to read a registration number on the tail boom of a helicopter, even while it's flying 100 feet overhead? I mean, it's impossible. It's just impossible. So anyway, I don't want to be all Debbie Downer. I do think we can get there if we were to use science. We're 20 years on now. This data should have already been all collected. Even here in the United States, the UAS IPP thing, the GAO, the enforcement thing, they're complaining that the FAA is just really not collecting any quality data. So just to me, it's like the regulatory wheel of suffering, and we'll be here in 2047 with the Air Force waiting.
Yes, that was it 47 or 49? It was the big thing. That was 47. And everyone said, because we used to talk about that, oh, this is pull up a sandbag today, but used to talk about that USAF 2047 prediction and say, I bet that's what it is. And everyone say to us, no. And it's looking ever more likely, isn't it? It is 2047, baby.
Just coming back to your point, Gary, you talked about a while ago about people that can be seen tend to act better. That sort of made me think of the new DJI remote ID. Yeah. Did you pick up on that the other week? But one thing, I don't know if you realise that fits in perfectly with the new EASA regulations as well. And so once they get that basically on board the Mavic Mini looks like it could be the first drone to fit into the open category for EASA. I don't see anything that it doesn't. I don't see any boxes it doesn't tick. It ticks all of them. I think the biggest interpretation, which we're still not sure how EASA will interpret this, is there is a section in there which states that the aircraft must be designed so that it limits the amount of damage it causes a human if it were to impact into it, and the propellers must do the same. So, you know,
they've got prop guards.
Well, yeah, but the prop guards make it more than 250 grams. So
use the Japanese battery.
That's an interesting thing. But at how big do the props need to be? You know, when you start getting up to 4 kilos, which is the A2 category, which has exactly the same wording within it. You know, a drone which weighs 4 kilos with 12-inch props on board, they could cause a lot of damage, and it states in the wording that it must be designed to limit damage. But really, the devil is going to be in the detail there as to whether it will need prop guards or not. And if it doesn't need prop guards, I think we could see a few accidents happen.
Yeah, it's unknown at the moment because the other one is the noise regulations as well, and we haven't quite seen how that falls into category because there's a maximum noise that they must comply with. I would think the Mini would get certified in its current guise, but it's nothing's confirmed. As you say, it would technically it fits into A0, but it would still require registration under the ASA rules as well because it has a camera, and that's the one thing compared to the US. For the UK, within the US rules, it currently doesn't require registration. In Europe, that is different because it has a data image capture device. It will still require registration, but would still fall under that A0 category. The A2 is the very, very interesting one because that's the one that's getting all of the PFCOs a little bit ruffled up, to say the least, because technically, obviously, PFCO comes out of this now. There is no distinction between commercial operation and normal flight. You are either flying for whatever purpose you want or you're not flying. And under A2, you'll be able to fly a sub 4 kilo craft, which is roughly an Inspire size. They might need some tweaks with just the COFC test, which is the basic 30 question test, which has to be held at the NQE, but there's no ground-based tests required in the sense of there's no pre-training needed by the NQE, and there's no flight test required as well. And that's the one that's really beginning to shake people up a little bit because basically you'll be able to operate with an Inspire-sized craft in congested area down to 35 meters within close to people commercially with just a basic test, which is probably going to cost less than 50 quid.
Down to 5 meters, not 35.
Down to 5 meters, technically, if it's got the slow mode, yes. But if you take it without the slow mode, it can be, say, 35 meters. And if the NQEs are going to charge more than 50 quid for this test, there will be uproar. I will be honest, because I don't see how. At the end of the day, this can be a written or an internet-based test at the location, and you will walk in, sit down, take the test, and walk out. So if they're going to charge more than £50 to £75 for it, there'll be big questions on why, unless the CAA are going to be taking a slice of the registration for that as well, and that hasn't been put out there yet, what sort of level of money the CAA are going to require from the NQEs or the RAEs, as the RAE, I think it is, James, off the top of my head, that they're going to become.
Well, I think the interesting one on the 5 meter is, as you say, they basically need zero training to operate down to 5 meters with a 4 kilo aircraft. I think the interesting, item there is the reason why they're saying you can go from 30 meters down to 5 is because it has a slow mode with it. And so what they're saying is, okay, well, if it's got slow mode, then the kinetic energy is going to be a lot less, which follows logical sense. But the problem with that theory is that slow mode only works if the aircraft is functioning correctly. A drone which is not functioning correctly, if it's lost a propeller, a motor, a speed controller, a bit of wiring, if the battery's broken, if the battery fails, if you get magnetic interference, if you get GPS interference, I could probably name another 10 things that could potentially go wrong with the machine. If any of those happen, then the aircraft is limited by physics, not by a bit of software, a line of software in the code.
And the thing is, so if it's falling from 5 meters, it's going to fall more slowly than if it's falling from 35 meters.
No, that's 5 meters distance, but
not height, and that's the irony. You could be, the only thing I don't see with this is how they're going to get past the injury aspect, as you said there, James, because it's not even the mass is the issue with that thing, it's the props. Most of these aircraft have got 11, 12-inch props. That'll do a lot of damage, let alone it's not the weight of the aircraft I'm worried about, it's the prop at that level.
You know what this highlights? This highlights the fact that we've got rules and regulations being made by people who don't know what they're doing. The BVLOS is a perfect example. As Patrick said, we've been doing BVLOS for 10 years, and we've done it safely. There's been no incidents. People have flown tens of kilometers, thousands of feet in the air. It's all been totally safe, performed by amateurs who know what they're doing. Then the regulators and the rulemakers come in. You've got people who have never even flown an FPV craft, let alone one beyond visual line of sight, telling us what we should do and telling us it's way too dangerous for us to do it. You've got to fill out a ream of paperwork and pay a huge amount of money before it becomes safe, because we don't know what we're doing, but we're going to tell you exactly how to do it right. This is lunacy.
Yeah, well, I know there's going to be a lot of uproar from the 3 or 4 operators in the UK who already have a 5-meter permission from the CIA for an OSC, and who've had to go through, who've had to write a 150-page operations manual, have to go, do refresher training down the park every month to be able to operate at those distances and maintain a level of currency and do huge amounts of training, who have to have procedures, cordons, and all the rest of it to be able to do that. And now suddenly anyone can now buy a 4-kilo aircraft and go out and do 5 meters.
And James, take up all that big weight of paperwork they bought and burn it, because that's what's happening. And there is no amount of shouting, screaming, or complaining is going to change this, because the CAA have basically hoodwinked everyone and saying, oh yes, we're going, and they've done what I wanted them to do, because I've had a few arguments with NQEs over the last couple of months, because they've been annoying me, because they've been saying, oh yes, but they're going to layer something on top. Oh yes, but no, it's not going to be this. Bullshit. It is exactly as I said it was, and that's not me. That is the CAA's own document that they published a year ago, and everyone was saying that they were going to go, oh, they're layering this. No, they're not. They are taking the EASA rules as they are to be able to take it, because it allows us to be able to do the transfer of what we're doing in the UK in Europe, and that is the whole point of this legislation.
Brexit, Ian, Brexit.
Yeah,
Brexit as soon as you can.
Well, I think if you'd been at the CAA stakeholder meeting last week, you might have a slightly different opinion. I think there are certainly some conversations happening which don't align with what you just said.
It will be, but it won't happen. Look, the CAA will say this: there will not be any. There'll be no layering on commercial operation, and as I see it today in their own paperwork, nowhere does it say they're going to put further restrictions on this.
Not yet. No, you're definitely right. At the moment, it is as it is, but. Yeah. I think there are, I wouldn't say that that's the end of the story. You saw how quickly things changed with the drone registration.
Yes.
I think hopefully,
but that was different. That's still within the James, but that's still within the framework of the EASA rules. The changes we made to the drone registration was all within the framework of what was within the EASA rules. It was there was ability within that for individual member states to change certain aspects of it, including setting the price, changing certain aspects around the age of the person for minimum registration as well. But the overall compliance of it is exactly the same, and that was where I had my issues when they're saying they're going to layer something on top when the document specifically states that they see no distinction between the kind of flight, whether it be commercial or hobby, for instance. That's in black and white in the CAA's own document. If they were going to layer something, they would not have written that in there. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but I think the point to be made here is that if you do add anything on top, then pilots in the UK can still operate within the EU as they can now. It would be people coming from the EU who want to operate in the UK who would have to comply with the extra parts. Yeah. So I don't think it's going to disadvantage UK operators. It might disadvantage European operators who want to fly over here. But why
is it not there yet then? Okay, if they're going to do this, why is this not here today? They've virtually laid out the groundwork for this now. NQEs are changing to REs. There is no more PFCO from the middle of next year. It no longer exists. We will get, I'm not sure what we'll get. There's a big argument on that. We're going to get some form of operating permission, yet it's not going to be called a general flight certificate. We're going to have very similar levels of permission than we've got today, yet that's basically what this new certificate is, but they're not giving us general, what was it, the GVC off the top of my head, James? I can't remember what it was called.
Something like that.
It's on paper that looks like what we've got, yet they're not going to give us that. We're going to get something else. So my only argument in this is, if they're going to do it, why aren't they saying it? Do you know what I mean?
I think they've put it out there and they're gauging feedback, and because there hasn't been any uproar or any people saying no, this is stupid, or we don't agree with this part, they've kind of just gone along with it. And EASA have basically just been feeding stuff, and they've been saying, well, we don't have to think about it. If EASA are thinking about it and dealing with all this, we can just kind of just say, okay, we'll adopt it. Fair enough.
Yeah.
If people turn around and say, no, this is ridiculous, then they have to be seen to at least consider the points that are being made. And if enough people feel the same way, like I don't know if you saw the poll that I put up on the Facebook group, but I think there was a clear resounding majority of people that thought there should be some form of distinction between hobbyists and commercial.
But
now,
that's PFCOs. That's existing people who have something to gain from it.
Yes, exactly. No, I agree with you. There is a level of biasness within that. But at the same time, like if you were, a big company like a Network Rail, for example, would you hire someone who met those minimum requirements for your EASA as a drone operator? Well, I don't think you would. And the key is, are we talking about, okay, well, if we're going to lower the base minimum, I don't think actually it's going to change a lot, because I think big companies, they hire in a drone operator, they're already looking for more than a minimum to go and bring it in. You look at the people who got on the Network Rail framework, I think all of them pretty much had OSCs. And pretty much all of them had, really comprehensive safety management systems and safety procedures in place. And, some Tom, Dick and Harry who's come off the street and bought themselves a drone and going to, filling in the tender for Network Rail, do they stand a chance of winning any work from them?
No.
No,
and this is it. I hope that there is no layering on top of this. I'm a PFCO. For me, I sincerely hope this comes as it is, because I've never liked the fact of you're flying for commercial means you've got to have a special ticket or something like that. As you say, the market will take care of itself. When you go to a big company and they say, okay, show me your insurance first of all. Number one is going to be show me your insurance, and that's going to be the big thing that keeps many people outside of it, because insurance companies are not going to give you masses of liability when you've got no drone experience. They're going to be layering your capabilities, your insurance based on your capabilities. I hope they don't layer something on top of this, because I want the doors to be smashed open. At the end of the day, it doesn't make sense a qualified photographer who's been taking ground-based images for years, who's been a hobby pilot flying model aircraft for years, has to go through a PFCO just to take a picture at a wedding. I've always thought that is absolute bonkers. But as James says, it's not realistic. They're all going to take the high-end work. They're not. The best operators who've been operating businesses for long periods of time are still going to get the same work they're going to get today, regardless of the PFCO or not.
Yeah. Well, I think no matter what happens, there's still going to be, the same amount of work required for people. I think there will still be training required, and I think it might not be compulsory, but it may as well be.
Well, it still is on the larger aircraft as well. Let's look at this. It's only up to 4 kilo you're going to get away with this. Anything above 4 kilo, you're still going to need to take this the certificate anyway, which again still has the ground-based training, still has the field-based training. So the large aircraft are still going to need this. It's only really going to open the doors up for the small sub 4 kilo aircrafts, and that's not the big ones.
The thing I worry about is how much damage could be done to our industry if this backfires. They talk about it being risk, it all being based on risk. Well, I'd love to see the calculations. I'd love to see the science, as Patrick is saying. I'd love to see the science behind these numbers of, sub 250, sub 900, sub 4 kilos, and the kinetic energy limits. Like, what is that based on? Fair enough. Are they considering damage from props, and what are the rules regarding that kind of side of things?
But these guys are flying anyway, aren't they? Let's be prepared. Let's be honest here. These guys, it's not like they're not flying today. Nothing changes here. These are still people with aircraft flying. Yes, there are people flying today without the ticket or the license or whatever people like to call it, the PFCO, and they're taking money. So there are many out there. The ticket doesn't make you safe. The training gives you the base, it gives you the information, it gives you the knowledge, but you could skim through it and still be a total idiot. So the ticket in itself doesn't really prove competence. It just means that you've got through a course, and I suppose that's where the big issue is, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's pilot competency. You know,
Yep.
if I look at an OSC that I would complete at the moment, is you know, one of the biggest things that the CAA look for is pilot competency. That, you know, for reducing distances, that is the #1 criteria for getting your distance reduced, is to have, you know, high levels of pilot competency. So what they're now saying is you can go down to 5 meters with a sub 4 kilo with 0 pilot competency, which is completely against every single thing that they've been going on about for the last 4 years. So are they admitting that they were wrong, or are they, or are they wrong? Is EASA wrong? You know, they both can't be true.
I think they've just gone, this is how we thought of it. However, we're now adopting this, and that's what we're going to do. And you know, I can imagine. Here? What's that?
What's missing is the comprehensive risk analysis, risk assessment. No one's done it, so all this stuff is just guessing. It's all guessing, and that's why it changes so often, because no one has done the comprehensive scientific risk assessment to determine what the true risks are. And that's going to be #1 in all regulations.
Well, what they're really doing here is they're basically saying, okay, well, let's try and push the drone industry forward. So what we'll do is we'll take all of the onus, you know, for risk mitigation off the pilot competency. We'll take it all out of the procedures. So you don't have to have any procedures. You don't have to have any pilot competency. We'll pile all of the risk mitigation onto the technology. And that's what they've tried to do through this EASA regulation, is if you look at all of the mitigating points there. The problem is, though, that the mitigations that they've got on the aircraft certainly aren't foolproof. There are definitely huge gaps there in terms of, you know, like you could there's nothing about redundancy in those regulations. There's nothing, absolutely zero about redundancy. So, you know, for them to go down that path without talking about, you know, one of the most fundamental points about, you know, platform safety, which is redundancy, I don't see how they can completely, you know, they could relax those components, relax training, relax procedures a bit, but to completely say, okay, you pretty much don't need any, you just have to do an online theory test, which isn't going to teach you anything about flying drones. You know, let's put it that way. As far as I'm concerned, a theory test will teach you, you know, about different classes of airspace, and, you know, whether you're looking at a cumulonimbus cloud or you know, a bit of stratus, but, you know, is that going to be useful for people out there operating in a congested area, 5 meters from people, trying to understand how to manage crowd control? What happens in the event of emergency? What happens if you get magnetic interference from, you know, a high voltage DC power or some metal that's under the ground, and the thing then accelerates off in one direction? It's not going to teach you any of that. The only way that you can mitigate against that is being able to switch into ATI mode and take manual control of the aircraft to rectify it. And so how are you know, where do the regulations take that into account? I don't see that they do.
No, because there's no ops manual at sub 4 kilos. There's no requirement. The ops manual doesn't kick in until you go back to the larger certificate. The other interesting one I'd be interested to see is how the REs handle this new course, because obviously they're going to be doing it. They're going to be handing it out. I'll be intrigued to know if they will let you simply book the test without any prior training. And whilst there's no requirement for it within the regulation, I wouldn't be shocked to see them only offer it with a day's training or something like that, because there's nothing to stop them doing that. At the end of the day, all of the training centers will be able to say, we're only going to offer this as part of a package and not on its own. And whilst the law states you can fly with that course on its own, with just that test on its own, I'll be very intrigued to see if the REs actually will allow you to book just the 30-question test with no prior training, because I wouldn't be shocked if they wind something else into this.
Well, what's the most interesting thing is actually any of us could set up our own practical flight training company now. Any of us could, and it'll be completely unregulated. So we're basically going from a regulated practical training scenario to completely unregulated, because people will still want practical training, but you won't have to be regulated anymore by the CAA. So, and basically it opens up the market. Anyone who wants to do that kind of stuff, now you can do practical flight training. So, and to be honest, I've been offering that to people already, because for OSCs, it's a useful component for proving pilot competency. But it's,
and all you've got to do is align yourself with one of the REs and say, right, I'm gonna come to you always for all my people. Here's the people I'm going to transfer to you for the tests. And as you say, you don't have to have any official affiliation. At the end of the day, they're providing the test, you're providing the ground-based training. There's no mutual.
I wonder in the UK if there's any organisation that's had, I don't know, really good flying training tests for model aircraft for about 75 years.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's anybody that's
no one
got sort of a test. There's no one. Oh, okay. No. Oh, that's all right then. Yeah.
But it's very interesting. And here in New Zealand, we have the CAA recognised certifications, including wings, which are like the BMFA. Whatever things, And there was a thing in the latest Model Flying New Zealand magazine saying clubs should be on the lookout for people who are coming to their clubs simply to get the certification that would allow them to operate within 4K of an airport. Not interested in the hobby, they're only interested in leveraging the easily gained certification for their commercial benefit. And that's something you've got to watch out on. And I think hobby organisations should steer clear of being involved in certification of commercial operators in that way. But the whole thing is, when you look at this, it's obvious these regulations and all that have been concocted not by people in the industry, because there's a fairly good consensus here of what should be done, but people outside the industry who don't have a clue what the hell they're doing. I
think my point with the BMFAs, would be that there's really good tickets. If you can fly the BMFA A and Bs, you can fly. They're not easy. So even if somebody did come along, well, actually, as it would be now, if somebody came along for their sub 4 kilo craft, they'd have more training than someone that's just gone and done the tick test.
Yeah, but whilst I kind of agree with you with BMFA, I think there is a gap there with the BMFA training, which doesn't teach you sort of, I suppose, scenario-based training. Right? It teaches you how to fly the aircraft, but going from that situation where you're in a park flying an aircraft manually to going into central London and flying it round a skyscraper where you've got wind turbulence and all sorts of other factors and crowd control and all of these other things. I think there's the training isn't just flying training, it's also there's a huge range of other components to flying in a congested area that need to be done to be able to do it safely.
So James, where do you think this is going to end up? Because obviously this is, you do a lot of OSCs and things like that. Let's say this happens as it is today, as we've seen it. So in June, sub 4 kilos, basic test, 30 questions. Where are you going to end up in this? Because it's interesting, because I've looked at this and thought, I don't even need to renew at this point based on the aircraft I fly. If this comes in, I don't see the point of me going for I don't fly larger aircraft than 20 kilos, than 4 kilos that often. I have a few, I have two myself, but I don't take them out anymore. I don't need to. The Inspire does everything I want it to do. And most commercial operators are going to be in that scenario as well. So where do you think you'll be in this? Because obviously it's taking part of your business away.
Wait, 1 second. Let me just, I just need to get my crystal ball out. So I actually think that, and I spoke to Andy Hamilton from CAA about this, and he's in agreement that actually I think the number of OSC applications is going to increase when EASA comes out. I think the open category is going to be fairly restrictive still. At the moment, there are 0 aircraft which fit into the open category.
Correct.
Well, actually, they do fit into the open category. They fit into the A4 category.
Yeah,
basically means
anything. Yeah, anything can fly in A4 at the start. Basic current aircraft. Yeah. Yes.
So basically everything that's in existence at the moment, as the rules stand, come July the 1st, you will have to remain 150 meters away from a congested area.
Basically, nothing changes.
If you have a PFCO. Then that will be transferred into the specific category. So you'll maintain your current PFCO permissions.
Yes.
Yeah. So you'll get a grandfather rights on that. So the current
basically we'll end up having what we've got today. Basically, yes.
Yeah. In our current situation, 150 meters is going to be anyone new entering the market is going to be on 150 meter distance from people.
Yes.
Which is going to be extremely restrictive. Now, I'm almost certain that DJI and I think there's a lot of aircraft manufacturers which are already developing for those open categories. How long is that going to take for those to be approved? Who knows? Are DJI working on a sub 4 kilo aircraft at the moment, or are they concentrating on the hobbyist market, which is where they earn most of their money?
Well, Inspire 2 is already sub 4 kilo, so the aircraft's there. It just has to get everything else done around that.
It is, but the thing is that, you know, in the CIA's own words, it's very unlikely that any existing aircraft will meet the open category standards. So, you know, it's going to be new aircraft that will meet those standards. Everything else will be a PFCO, or will be 150 meters away from congested areas. So I think we'll see most movement in the first 12 months in the hobbyist category.
Yes.
I think that is where the biggest changes are going to be made. And to be honest, that's the area which I think does need the biggest change, because people are already operating Mavics within 150 meters of congested areas, and they're doing it safely in most circumstances. Now, what they're doing is they're bringing in these rules on, like, limiting the height to 400 feet, doing remote ID. And so these kind of things actually are going to tackle a lot of those problems of people misusing drones in, you know, actually flying a sub 250 gram over London isn't a big problem as long as you're below 400 feet. So if they can limit you to 400 feet maximum height, then that's probably solving a lot of the problem there. So I think that's the first thing. I think we're going to see a lot of people, and you're already starting to see it. If you look at what's happened in the past 12 months, the growth in OFC applications has increased. There seems to be a bit of a rush from PFCOs to want to move across into a specific category.
But what reason would you have for a PF? What reason are they going to want for an OSC specifically then? Because you're still going to need one above 4 kilos for close to people anyway.
To have control over your rules.
Yeah.
People, you know, it's all well and good you saying all of the, you know, these rules, this open category. There's going to be a number of people that will apply for, but people like flexibility. People don't like to have to conform to rules. They've already got probably 30 or 40,000 pounds worth of equipment.
Yeah.
Do they want to sell all of that and buy a new set of equipment?
Yeah.
And cost themselves £10,000, or would they spend a few grand and get themselves an OSC to basically do what the hell they want?
Yeah.
I think probably the latter. So I think OSCs is going to be the way that people will end up going. And what you're also seeing is a movement towards these more complex operations. I'm working on BVLOS applications at the moment. I'm working on drone light show applications at the moment. There's some quite cool stuff that I'm sort of seeing at the moment, and all of this is going to start opening up. So you've got this market here. You kind of got two bands. I'll try and put them. So you've got your two bands. You've got this band here, which is like this band is like your sort of I would say.
Turn them around, James. The other way.
No, I'm not going to be rude. So you've got this lower band, which is like your prosumer. You then got this sort of more industrial, sort of high-end world, which is where you've got your BVLOS, your EVLOS, some of your more higher risk operations. All you're going to see is it go like that. And the bottom part of the prosumer is going to be accounted for with the open category, but you still have the higher end of that, and that sort of more complex operations is going to expand more. So I think there's going to see a lot of growth in there. So I'm not too worried myself. You know, I've got to evolve and change what I do, but certainly I do worry about potential impact that this could have if we go and get a front page Daily Mail newspaper story of drone flyer was flying, you know, at the side of a road and crashed into the face of my 4-year-old child and like scarred him for life, kind of type situation.
But that's already good. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it's easy for us as commercial operators to say, oh, the second someone's flying for commercially, it could happen anyway, isn't it? And that's the reality. I can imagine the NQEs weren't very happy with all of this when this was landed upon them. I can imagine there was a few twitchy bums as they read through this.
So I've been heavily thinking about actually going down that route myself and becoming an NQE myself. And that's because I think that a lot of NQEs are being a little bit short-sighted in this.
Yeah.
Is actually, I think training is going to increase.
Yeah, agree.
And it's not going to be compulsory training. It's going to be, what you're seeing is a movement away from hobbyists, or not hobbyists, but you're seeing a movement away from sort of smaller one-man band pilots across to organizational operations.
Yeah.
And organizational
this is where the new system will let a company get people in easier, get them started, be a lot easier, and then that company will train them in the inspection of whatever it is. I think it's a good entry level sort of a qualification.
And the thing is as well, like, you know, there are a lot of very, very good NQEs out there, but there are also some who aren't very good. And so meeting the standard of being an NQE, meeting the regulator standard, clearly isn't a differentiating factor for whether you deliver good training or not. That seems to be more about, you know, the free market commercials of, okay, if you want to succeed in this market, you have to deliver good training. And actually, really what the driving force has been over the last few years has more been about, okay, well, I need a PFCO to operate. Who can give it to me for the least cost? And that's been the main driving force. It's been cost. But actually, what's going to happen now is, I think the need for training is going to more come from industry, and it's going to be coming from the larger companies who want to mitigate against sort of corporate liabilities. Of, you know, at the end of the day, if you crash the drone and you hurt someone, then you're going to be stood in front of a judge who's going to be saying, well, why is that pilot, a completely brand new pilot, he's never flown before, why are you out there with a drone that could kill someone? And so that's going to be the kind of questions that big companies are going to be asking themselves, and they're not afraid to, you know, put 5 or 10 grand into some training if they believe it's going to be of benefit to their organization. You know, these companies, most of these companies, it will be someone in a position of authority who'll have to go and speak to their manager and say, yeah, I think our pilot should have some training because I think it will reduce risk for our organization. And there's no manager in their right mind who's going to say, no, I'm not paying for that. They'll pay for it because they don't want the liability. And I think, you know, it's a positive thing. I think training is a great thing for people to do, because you can't learn everything on the job. If you learn everything on the job, then you will have accidents on the way. If you can avoid some of those accidents, then that's a good thing. And I think as well, training from a training perspective, I don't really want to say too much on this because it's still quite early days, but with an OSC, you have to prove pilot competency. There's only one way to prove, and there are ways to prove pilot competency through training. But I won't go into any more detail on that at the moment. But yeah, there is certainly a lot of overlap between OSCs and training, put it that way.
I'm so glad I'm an outlaw.
Yeah, absolutely. Now look, we've nearly been going. If we keep going for another 8 minutes, this will be, I think, the longest one ever. It'll be a 3-hour job.
There's one more thing. Just looking into my crystal ball, there is one more thing that I think is an important point, is the emphasis on requirements for operators being shifted from the CA across to insurers. And I think I already brought that up earlier, but I think the insurers will start holding the keys to the locks. But what will be interesting though is that, you know, there will be a competition between insurers on who can be less scrupulous. And so you may end up in a situation where initially, until an accident happens, the insurers are prepared to take on a little bit more risk than they should be. And they're all in competition, and they're like, well, look, they're not requiring this and this, so let's not require it either. And as soon as there's an accident, then the insurers will then suddenly pull the strings back in and say, no, you're going to have this if you want to do that.
Yeah, because they got a 5,000, they got a 5,000 person captive market. Now that could potentially open up to every drone owner in the country, and they're going to want a slice of that, aren't they? And that's the reality.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing is the overlap between OSCs and insurers, because insurance companies base an operation on risk. They price their policy based on risk. The whole point of an OSC is assess risk. So there's quite an interesting synergy between the two there, I think.
It is interesting. I spent a lot of time reading it over the last couple of weeks, and I've got my head around it pretty solidly, in the sense of I understand it as it is today. I've been intrigued to watch how some of the NQEs have reacted to it, watching some of the posts, and it's been quite interesting to see how some of the commercial operators are kicking off. The reality is very little changes. It won't change for 2 years anyway. It'll take 2 years for this to proliferate. By the time the aircraft become available and people will be able to do it, it's going to be 2 years. By the time most people get their head around it, it's going to take a bit of time for the NQEs to give it to the REs as well, and it's going to be interesting to see how they find new ways of getting more money out of people, because it's interesting what James said earlier about some being good and some being bad. And look, the industry has a bit of a bad rep. Let's be honest, there are NQEs over the years that have done very bad things for operators. The scheme where they wanted to renew for you, I can't remember who was it, the bunker card, was it? There's a couple of other things. There's been some real nasty elements to this over the years as well, because they've had a captive market. They've always been, you want to operate commercially, you've got to come to us. And now that to a point will free up. I do think this COFC is going to be interesting. I reckon they will not make it quite as easy as it looks on paper. I would be shocked if they will allow you just to book it like a driving test and walk in and take it. I think it'll be interesting to see what the CAA's reaction to that is as well. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if they all sort of get together and sort of go, hey, let's make sure that they have a minimum of half a day's training before we let them do that test, because we don't feel it's right to let someone just take the test and run. And I don't know how the CAA will deal with that. Obviously, there will always be places that will just do the test, but this can't be done online. It has to be done at their test center as well. So I can see that test not being quite as easy as it looks on paper right now.
Yeah, I think the thing is what operators have to tell themselves is, what kind of operation do they want to be? Do they want to be, a business that does the bare minimum, or do they want to be a business that accelerates themselves to the front of the table so that they can compete in the big tenders for the big work? If you want to compete for the big work, you have to put in the homework beforehand to be able to get there. So I don't see too much changing. The legal requirement will change, and I do worry that the cowboy sort of industry that we have seen, there has been a cowboy side of drone operations up until now in some areas. I do worry a little bit that could increase under the new regulations, that we're going to see a lot more cowboys think, oh, well, this is easy. All I have to do now is do this online test and I can do whatever I want with a drone. In some markets that will work. There will be a number of markets or a number of industries where that will happen. And that's the worrying point for me is, maybe roof inspections, people doing roof inspections and things like that. Are we going to end up with a cowboy industry in roof inspections? Potentially, that could well be the case. But I think where the quality comes from is in the reporting that happens afterwards. So, are you going to employ a cowboy flyer? Or, essentially these people who do roofing inspections already and don't have drones, they'll probably buy drones now. and they'll probably do things correctly because they're professional companies. So yeah, maybe market forces will be able to
Always does, doesn't it?
equalize.
Cream always rises to the top. Simple as that.
Indeed. Just ask Bruce. Let's just ask Bruce. You see, are you listening? He is listening. So
yeah, I'm listening. I'm just writing to CAA at the moment. Actually, I've got I'm doing an inquiry. You want to know why? Because in their latest Vector magazine, which is like the air safety magazine, they've published an article about military use of the airspace, and it says that students can learn about low-level navigation. Blah 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 blah. It says they can be doing training in any uncontrolled airspace virtually anywhere in the country. Low flying in the Texan, which is one of the training craft, is at 250 to 500 feet AGL and speeds between 180 and 240 knots. That speed in close proximity to terrain can make it difficult, make for a high pilot workload, and that can make it challenging for the students to see obstacles or hazards until they are within closer range. Now, I fly model aircraft in the 0 to 400 foot airspace range, and it is my responsibility to see and avoid manned aircraft. But if these people are flying at very low altitude at very high speed, anywhere in the country without warning or prior notice, how can I possibly fulfill my commitment to keep out of the way? Because they can be upon me before I know.
Hear them.
What?
You'll hear them coming, and you'll reduce
No.
your altitude.
I'll tell you now. Actually, we've been caught out before. An aircraft coming at 250 knots at low level, you can't hear it sometimes. It really, if they've got terrain, because that's what happened at the airfield the other day. We had a Piper Malibu came in, very low level, very high speed. We didn't hear it until it was at the threshold of the runway. And so I'm going to ask them, how do I mitigate this risk whilst operating under the regulations? And if there is an incident, who's going to be to blame? And if I cannot be given the ability to fly there, why are we even allowed to fly model aircraft at all?
You probably ring your local low-flying cell. I don't know if you must have a low-flying cell and say I'm flying an LFA-7 from whatever to whatever. Do you have any traffic? Because the Air Force guy will have had to have booked into the low-flying area.
It's not like this is anywhere in the country. There's no there's not a designated low flying. Yeah.
I bet you it is. I bet you it is. I bet you it's. I'm going to have to look. I'm going to have to go online and look.
You just hit the 3 hours, Gar.
I know. There you go. Ding, 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 ding.
But I'll ask them for their official advice. We'll see what they say, because safety is their job, and they've got conflicting airspace use here, and there's no easy way to deconflict it that I can see.
Well, that's what you do in the UK. The whole of the UK is broken up into LFAs, and you just say, I'm in LFA 7 from whatever, have you got any traffic? And they would say they have. You wouldn't know exactly where it's going to be, but you'd know it's within that block of the LFA. So thorny one. So were there any other stories this week?
There was loads, but I've missed it all.
Did you see the rant on my community page about that microlight pilot in the USA?
Which
you need to go to my XJet community page. I watched a video. Some guy died, and another guy got his plane, and he was waxing on.
I saw that.
Yeah. But you notice he was flying low level over rivers and over fields and things, well below 400 feet. And I just put a very simple comment saying, you're pretty brave to be flying that low in the era of the drone. And he came back and said, you and your toys and your people with your LCD screens and you're all bullshit and rubbish and crap. And I thought, my goodness, it was an arrogant and rude response. Not what I'd expected. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just said, you've got balls flying that low. Demonetized. And the response was totally out of whack with what I would have expected. He's since edited his response on YouTube, but I put a copy of it up on my community page because it's a perfect example of, if he hit a drone or a model and ended up upside down the field like a certain New Zealand microlight pilot, you can bet that he wouldn't be saying it's all the drone flyer's fault, even though he's down there hugging the ground. And I thought, we are not the people making the mistakes here.
Oh, we are. Oh, yes, we are.
Just different mistakes.
Come on, be reasonable. And Chris Eiffels 2D, yes, I have exactly the same with the crop dusters here, and they fly beneath me here in the valley down there. I don't see them until the last second either. And with that, on those bombshells, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for this marathon session. Dear viewer, if you've been here the whole time, you deserve some sort of medal. On Christmas Eve, we'll have a Christmas Eve one. Please bring fancy dress and beverages.
Are we doing Christmas Eve, are we? Cool.
Well, yeah, if you want,
Yeah.
if you can get away with it, well, you'll be very excited because you've got to open up your Rover on Christmas Day.
It'll be Christmas Day here.
Shall I
It'll be
unbox
Christmas
it?
Eve for you guys.
It will be.
Some of us it'll be Christmas Day, so I'll have to. I'll be surrounded in tinsel, and I've had my Bucks Fizz and my ham on toast. I'll be all.
Come on, leathered up, Bruce. Come on, completely leathered
I
up.
shall be completely blotto, just like normal.
In the 70s, you've had Bucks Fizz would have meant a completely different thing, but there we are. It was in the 80s. I can't remember when that song came out.
No,
that,
I was late. Yeah, sorry, I was late. I didn't get out of my meeting until late, unfortunately. I was not asleep through Patrick, by the way. I've just read the comments. I was reading some messages. I wasn't asleep, I promise. I was listening intently to Patrick.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Do we believe him? No.
No, we don't. James, thank you very much. Ian, Bruce, thanks very much. And everyone that's here earlier. Dear viewer, be safe, whatever you're doing this week. We'll see you again, 2100 GMT next week. Take care. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Click.
Click.